Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was cutting through the Bonneville Salt Flats late last July, trying to make time between Elko and Ogden. I don't usually drive that way, but I'd gotten a late start out of Wells, and I figured the I-80 stretch would be faster than the mountain roads. It's wide open out there, flat for miles in every direction, with nothing but crusted salt and shimmer. You feel like you're on another planet. It was around 6 in the evening. Still plenty of daylight, but the heat was holding steady near 100. My truck's AC was doing its best, but it had this weird wheeze to it, like it was struggling to keep up. I had the windows up anyway, trying to keep dust out. I'd been driving maybe an hour since the last gas station, tires humming, no music, just the drone of the road. That's when I noticed something up high, dead ahead. At first I thought it was just a spot on the windshield. I flicked the wipers, but it didn't move. It was tiny, like a little smudge in the sky, too far up to make out any shape. It didn't look like a plane. It wasn't glinting or blinking, just this faint dark speck, barely darker than the sky around it. I figured maybe it was a drone or one of those weather balloons. But it wasn't moving. I mean, not at all. And there wasn't a single cloud in the sky, nothing to hide it. I kept glancing up at it as I drove. 20 minutes later, it was still there, same spot, same size. No drift, no fade, just hanging. The flats do weird things to your sense of depth. You can drive for an hour and the mountains barely seem closer. Maybe the thing was bigger than I thought. Maybe it wasn't even that high, just far. I tried not to fixate on it, but every time I glanced up, it was exactly where I left it. I pulled off at a little rest area, just a slab of concrete and a trash can. Got out to stretch my legs. The air was still, no wind, not even a bird. You don't realize how quiet that place is until you stop the engine. I looked back up at the sky and the shape was still there. It was higher than I'd thought, way higher, like above flight paths, and no contrail. It wasn't a balloon. Balloons move. This thing was absolutely motionless. It didn't spin, didn't bob, just a dot. I took a picture with my phone, but the screen glare was awful and I could barely see it. I zoomed all the way in and still, it was just a blurry pixel. Nothing you could show someone and say, see, that's what I saw. When I got back in the truck, the AC had stopped blowing. Fans still going, but no cool air. I tapped the dash. Nothing. It hadn't given me any warning. It just stopped. I kept driving. Maybe 15 minutes later, I started hearing a low hum. I thought it was engine noise at first, or maybe the road vibrating a little, but it was constant, real low, like standing near a big transformer station. I turned the radio on and flipped through the stations, static across the board. Not even a Spanish channel, not even AM, just static. I shut it off and rolled the window down a crack, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But the hum stayed, low and steady. The shape above me hadn't moved. I passed a dry lake bed around 7. The sun was low enough now that everything looked burned out, bleached horizon, washed out sky. That's when I noticed something else. My shadow on the ground was wrong. It wasn't just long, which it should have been. It was off to the side, like the light source wasn't coming from where the sun was. I could see the sun in my side mirror, clear as day, low on the left. But the shadow of my truck stretched at an angle that didn't line up. It looked like it was being cast from something above me and slightly behind. I slowed down and leaned over the wheel, trying to see if anything was above. The shape was still there, higher now, or maybe I was closer. It didn't look like it had changed position, but my shadow had gotten sharper, like the light was more focused. I pulled off again. There wasn't a real turnout, so I just eased onto the salt, crunching under the tires. Got out and walked around the truck, looking straight up. It was still just a speck, but now there was this pressure. Not physical, not like a headache, more like my thoughts were moving slower, like trying to think through syrup. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes without realizing I hadn't moved. No bugs, no wind, no planes. Then I heard 3 distinct pops. Not loud, just sharp, like static bursts. They weren't coming from the sky, they were behind me. I turned around. There was nothing there. flat white as far as I could see. The sun was nearly at the horizon, and the shadows were stretching weird again. I got back in the truck and turned the key. The dash lights flickered once, then went dark. Second try, it started fine. I didn't stop again. The shape stayed overhead for another half hour. It finally vanished right around Wendover. Not moved, just gone. One moment it was there, next it wasn't. I checked the rear view constantly. Nothing behind me, no sound, no lights. When I pulled into town, the radio came back, clear as anything. First thing I heard was a local station playing Fleetwood Mac. The AC started working again. Cool air like nothing had ever gone wrong. I checked my phone before I got gas. The photo I'd taken of the shape? Gone. Just a black rectangle where it should have been. I checked my gallery. Nothing new since the day before. I still had service. I could open maps, text people, everything worked fine. But that picture was just gone. That night, I stayed at a little motel behind a gas station, tried not to think about it too much, but I couldn't sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I took a walk out behind the building. There was a long patch of open gravel and a chain link fence. On the other side was just flat desert stretching into nothing. And out there, way off near the hills, I saw 3 white lights. They weren't blinking. They weren't in a line like plane lights. They were in a triangle. They hovered there for maybe a minute. Then they dipped low, like they were sinking into the earth, and disappeared. No sound, no wind. I went back inside, locked the door, left the TV on all night. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to go camping in the middle of nowhere, but last September, my friend Lila convinced me to join her and 2 others for a weekend at Lake Renwick. It's this pretty remote spot up in northern Vermont, surrounded by dense woods and hills, and the only way in or out is a dirt road that gets rough the further you go. I'm more of a city guy, but the idea of unplugging sounded good. We got there Friday afternoon. Lila, her boyfriend Nate, a guy named Joel I'd never met, and me. Joel was this quiet, lanky guy who looked like he could disappear into the trees without a trace. We all brought gear, and Lila had a small tent set up near the edge of the lake with a fire pit just behind it. The water was calm and dark, reflecting the thick green canopy around us. That first night, after dinner and some beers, we sat around the fire telling stories. Nothing creepy, just typical camp stuff. The sky was clear, stars everywhere. I remember looking up and thinking how far away the city felt, how quiet everything was. The bugs were mostly gone. The air was cool but not cold. We all turned in around midnight. I slept in the tent with Lila, while Nate and Joel had their own setup a few feet away. I don't remember exactly when it started, but I woke up to this weird noise. It was a high-pitched tone, kind of like a whistle, but continuous, cutting through the silence like a laser. It wasn't loud, more like something you'd hear if you pressed your ear against an old radio speaker. It came in waves, pulsing slowly, rising and falling, but never stopping. I sat up, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Lila was still asleep next to me, breathing steady. I checked my phone, no service, which wasn't surprising. Nate and Joel's tents were dark, no sign anyone was awake. Then I felt it. The ground beneath us began to vibrate, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. It wasn't shaking hard, but steady enough that I could feel it through the mattress pad and the soles of my feet. I thought maybe it was a truck passing far off, but I couldn't hear an engine or anything else. The vibration lasted maybe a minute before fading out, and the tone dropped into a low hum before going silent altogether. I leaned back down, trying to calm myself, but it wasn't working. I could still feel this weird pressure in my head, like something was pressing from the inside out. Then I blinked, and everything went dark. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was pouring into the tent, and Lila was shaking my arm, saying we had overslept. I looked at my watch, nearly 10 a.m. I swear I was awake only a few minutes ago, maybe less. I got out of the tent and saw Nate and Joel packing up their gear. They looked the same as always, but when I asked if they heard anything during the night, they just blinked and said no. Joel rubbed his eyes and said, "What, the weird noise? I don't remember that." Nate was confused too, like he'd slept through the whole night. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Had I dreamed the tone, the vibration? But it felt too real. We ate breakfast quickly and decided to hike a trail that circled part of the lake. As we walked, I kept glancing at the ground, trying to catch any sign of something strange. At one point, Lila stopped and pointed out a patch of flattened grass about 10 yards off the trail. It wasn't old, like someone had knelt or stood there recently, pressing the plants down in a perfect circle maybe 3 feet wide. I asked if any of them had been there. They said no. Joel joked about Bigfoot or aliens, but his voice didn't have much humor behind it. We finished the hike and headed back to camp. On the way, I noticed my phone had a little signal again and checked the time. I felt weird, like the hours I thought had passed were missing or out of order. Back at the campsite, I sat by the fire while the others packed up. I tried to replay the night's events in my head. I remembered lying awake, hearing the tone, feeling the vibration. But the others had no memory of it. That night on the drive back, I kept the windows down even though it was chilly. I half expected to hear that noise again or feel the ground pulse under the tires. Nothing. It was just me, the quiet hum of the engine, and the fading glow of the forest in the rearview mirror. I don't know what happened that night, and I can't explain the missing time or the feeling like something was watching us in the dark. All I know is that when you're out there, in a place where no one's around for miles, sometimes things happen that don't make sense, and not everyone remembers them the same way. The first time I noticed it was on my way home from work. I take the early evening train from Elmwood Station, which runs through a patch of mostly farmland and woods before hitting the outskirts of the city. The train's not crowded at that hour, and I usually sit by the window with my headphones in, catching whatever podcast or playlist I'm into. This particular day was late September, the kind of early fall evening where the air is crisp but not cold yet. The sky was clear, and the sun was just starting to dip behind the trees. I was zoning out, watching the fields blur past, when something caught my eye in the distance. There was a figure standing in the middle of a wide open field, maybe 100 yards from the tracks. At first, I thought it was just a scarecrow or a hunter waiting for deer to pass, but the shape was too still. It wasn't shifting or moving, not even a little. Then I saw the arm. It was raised straight up, pointing directly toward the sky, not waving or beckoning, just a finger pointing rigidly up like a signpost. It struck me as odd enough to pull my headphones out. The train kept moving, and I watched, expecting the figure to turn or move away. It didn't. It stayed locked in that position the whole time I could see it. The next day, on the same train at the same time, I looked again. The figure was there. Same spot, same posture. I blinked and checked twice. No one else around seemed to notice. The fields were mostly empty, a few cows grazing far off, but this figure just stood there, silent, unmoving. Over the next few days, I kept an eye out. Same figure, same pose. The weather changed. A rainy day, a foggy morning, a windy dusk, but the figure remained. The only constant. I started getting uncomfortable. It wasn't like it was watching me exactly. More like it was waiting for something, or signaling. One evening, I brought my camera. Not a fancy one, just my phone. I tried to zoom in and take a clear shot, but the image was blurry, like the figure was barely in focus no matter how close I got. The light around it seemed muted, or maybe the camera just couldn't capture it well. The train conductor was a guy named Lewis, friendly enough. I mentioned it once, joking about the field statue. He shrugged, said he never noticed anything unusual, and if someone stood there for a whole week pointing up, somebody else would have called it in. I asked around the station, but no one else reported seeing it. The locals just gave me odd looks. I started timing the train so I could watch the figure longer. Usually, the train passes that part of the field in about 20 seconds. One evening, I asked the conductor if he could slow down a bit. He looked at me funny but agreed. We slowed the train to maybe half speed. The figure didn't move, but when we were just a few dozen feet away, the air shifted. I'm not sure how to explain it, but there was a sudden drop in temperature. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could hear the faintest static noise in my ears, like when you put a radio near a phone. I looked out again, and the figure's arm was still raised, the finger pointing straight up. But the silhouette was clearer now, more defined edges, sharper shadows. Then the train lurched forward and sped up again, leaving the field behind. That night, I told my roommate Rachel about it. She's not into this kind of stuff and gave me the usual, maybe you're just stressed from work line, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I went back the next day with binoculars. The figure was there again. Same pose. What freaked me out was when I zoomed in, I thought I saw the face. Not detailed, more like a blank, smooth surface, almost like a mannequin or a statue. But something about the way it caught the light made it look wrong. Later that week, the weather turned cloudy and gray. On the train ride home, I noticed the field looked different. The grass near the figure was flattened, pressed down in a perfect circle about 6 feet wide, like someone or something had been standing there for a long time. I took a mental picture. When I got home, I checked the local news and social media, hoping someone else had noticed the figure. Nothing. No reports, no comments. I started to worry I was imagining it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or shadows, but on the last day of the week, I wasn't on the train. I took a detour and drove that stretch of road by the field. I parked in a small pullout near the edge of the trees and looked across the field. The figure was gone. The grass circle was still there, though, pressed down and weirdly dry. I called out, half joking. No answer. No movement. No sounds besides a soft breeze through the trees. I drove back home, but the feeling stayed with me. The weight of watching something silent, waiting, pointing up. I still take the train now and then. I don't see the figure anymore. But sometimes, just past sunset, I catch a glimpse of something at the edge of my vision near that field. Something still and watching. And when I look up at the sky, the memory of that finger pointing straight up feels like a question that never got answered. I was out for my usual evening run on that Saturday. The neighborhood where I live, Oak Ridge, is quiet around 6:30 p.m., especially on weekends. Houses set back from the road, a few street lights flickering on as the sun started dipping. It was a warm day, maybe 75 degrees or so, humid, but not unbearable. I like that time because it's usually peaceful. No rush hour, no kids screaming, just me and the slow shuffle of my sneakers on the pavement. I was jogging down Elm Street, heading toward the park, when I noticed the black van parked near the old community garden, the one with the cracked windows and the peeling paint. It stood out mostly because it didn't have any plates, no front, no back, just a plain black van sitting there like it had nowhere to go. I slowed down a bit, glanced over at it, but didn't think much of it. Vans without plates show up all the time around here. Sometimes they belong to painters or contractors, but those usually have some kind of company logo. This one was just there. I kept running past it. My headphones were on, but I wasn't really listening to anything. Just the usual playlist on shuffle, some old rock songs. I looked back once as I crossed the street to the park path. The van stayed put. The run was normal after that. No weird noises, no one lurking around. I got home, stretched, drank some water, and that was that. Next morning, Sunday, I went out to grab the paper from the driveway. I noticed that same black van again. It was still parked right where I'd seen it the night before. Only thing was, it was covered in frost. Like the whole windshield and the side windows had this thick white frost crust, and the roof was dusted with it too. I blinked and stepped closer. It didn't make sense. It wasn't even cold overnight. The weather report said it'd been a mild, humid night. The temperature hadn't dropped below 70 degrees. I stood there for a minute, touching the frost with my finger. It felt cold, solid. But when I pulled my hand away, the frost didn't melt. It just stayed frozen, crisp, like it had been there for hours or more. I wondered if maybe it was some kind of prank or leftover from a fog machine or something from a party. But nobody in the neighborhood does stuff like that. I tried to see if anyone was inside. The windows were fogged from the frost, but I could make out shapes, empty seats, some kind of tarp or blanket in the back. No movement. The doors were locked tight. No noise. I decided to call the police, just to report an unregistered vehicle with no plates and the weird frost. The dispatcher said they'd send someone out to check it. I waited around for a while, but no one came by. Later, when I checked again in the afternoon, the van was still there, frost and all. Even the pavement underneath it was dry, no water puddles or anything that might have come from melting ice. I thought maybe the frost would have melted by evening, but when I took a late night walk around 11, it was still there. That's when I started noticing other odd things. First, the streetlights above the van were flickering in a way they hadn't before. Not a steady flicker, but more like a slow pulsing, dimming, and brightening. It was subtle, and I almost convinced myself I was imagining it until I looked up and saw the pattern repeat 3 times in a row. Then it stopped. I was about to turn around when I heard a soft humming. Not loud, more like a distant electrical buzz, almost rhythmic. I scanned the street trying to find the source, but there was nothing else around. No power lines buzzing, no transformers clicking. The van stayed quiet. Still frost-covered, windows opaque. I got home, locked the door behind me, and kept thinking about it all night. Monday morning, I figured maybe someone came to tow it or the cops took care of it, but no, the van was still there. Frost was gone, though. Just a normal black van now, clean, no plates. That's when I realized something else was off. The grass right next to the van was crushed flat in a perfect rectangle, like the van had parked on the grass, but there were no tire tracks or marks on the pavement near it. It was as if it materialized right there overnight. I told my neighbor Sarah about it when she came out to get her mail. She frowned and said she'd seen the van too, but hadn't paid it much attention. "You sure it wasn't there before?" she asked. "I'm pretty sure. I run past here every day." She shrugged and went inside. The rest of Monday was normal, but I kept stealing glances out my window, half expecting to see that frost again or something stranger. Tuesday morning, I woke up to a knock on the door. It was Officer Ramirez, the local cop I know from around the neighborhood. He asked if I'd noticed the van and if I could describe it. I gave him all the details. The missing plates, the frost that didn't melt, the strange humming and flickering lights at night. He listened, nodding, but his expression stayed serious. "I'll check into it," he said, then left. That night, I went out for another run. The van was gone. The spot where it had been was empty, grass back to normal, no crushed patches. I felt relief, but also a weird hollow in my stomach, like the whole thing was unfinished. I kept running the same route for the next week. No van, no frost, no humming. But one night, about 10 days later, I was heading home and saw a flicker of light from the edge of the park. It was faint, bluish, almost like a reflection on a small lake or puddle, but there was no water there. I stopped, trying to see better, but it disappeared. I checked my watch. It was 11:13 p.m. I walked faster home, heart racing for no reason I could explain. After that, I started noticing other small things. My phone would lose signal near that park, even when it was fine everywhere else. Sometimes I'd hear a low hum that seemed to come from under the ground. Nothing big. Nothing I could prove. I never saw the van again. But sometimes when the streetlights flicker just right, or the air feels a little too cold for no reason, I think about that frost-covered van and wonder what exactly it was doing parked there on that warm summer night with no plates and no driver. We pulled off the highway just past midnight, somewhere between Maple Ridge and the turnoff for Old Highway 22. The sky was clear, with that kind of deep black you don't get in the city, and I figured it was perfect for stargazing. My girlfriend, Lisa, had been driving for hours, so I suggested we stop, stretch, and look up for a bit. We found a little gravel turnout beside the road, a place you might miss if you blinked. No streetlights, just the sound of crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through the tall grass. Lisa parked the car and we got out with a couple of blankets. Our golden retriever, Henry, he's an odd little guy, all lanky and awkward, jumped out, sniffing everything like it was the first time he'd seen the outdoors. The air was cool but not cold. There was a faint smell of pine from the nearby woods. We spread the blankets near the edge of the turnout and lay back, pointing out constellations we both knew but hadn't thought about in a while. Lisa's voice was soft, the kind of voice that fills a quiet space without breaking it. After a while, Henry curled up between us, snoring lightly. That's when I noticed a light far off, high in the sky. It was bright, steady at first, like a plane or a bright star, but then it started moving. Not in a straight line, though. It zigzagged. Slow, deliberate arcs, sharp changes in direction that no airplane I'd ever seen could manage. I nudged Lisa and pointed it out. She squinted, then smiled like she thought I was making it up. But the light kept moving, smooth and silent, no sound of engines or anything mechanical. We watched it for maybe 5 minutes. It moved from left to right, then suddenly split. Not into 2 or 3, 5 separate points of light, each smaller but just as bright as the original. They spread out, almost like they were dancing in formation, then all vanished at once. Just gone. No flash, no trail, nothing. Lisa blinked and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I shook my head. No idea. We sat up, both feeling that weird mix of disbelief and unease. Henry lifted his head, ears twitching, but stayed put. After a few minutes of silence, I started looking around. The woods were dark, still, no movement or noise besides the night insects. No headlights, no other cars on the highway. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 12:42 a.m., and to see if maybe someone else had reported anything online. No alerts, no local news, nothing. Lisa wanted to keep watching, but after a bit, the unease started creeping in. That kind of quiet where your skin feels too exposed. We packed up and got back in the car. Driving back, I kept scanning the sky. Every so often, a shooting star or a satellite would pass, but nothing like before. The next day, we told a few friends about it, and they laughed it off as a drone or some kind of light show. But that night, I kept hearing a faint hum when I was alone in the house. It wasn't loud enough to be outside, more like something vibrating just beneath the surface of the air. I asked Lisa if she heard it, but she said no. For the next week, the humming stayed, mostly when it was quiet. I checked the power lines, the water pipes, nothing. One evening, I took Henry out back, and the dog suddenly froze, staring into the woods. His hackles were up, and he growled low. I shone the flashlight toward where he was looking, but there was nothing, just dark trees and shadows. The next day, I went to the turnout again. The grass was crushed where we had been sitting, but the tire tracks from the car were different than I remembered. Too close together, like a narrower vehicle had parked there. Lisa swore it was the same spot, but the evidence didn't match. I brought a notebook and started writing down everything that felt off. The light, the humming, Henry's reaction, the strange tire tracks. Nothing really added up. Weeks later, Lisa and I still talk about it sometimes. The vanishing lights, the hum that no one else hears, the way Henry sometimes won't go near the woods after dark. I don't know what we saw that night. All I know is it wasn't anything normal, and it's still there, just out of reach. Like a question with no answer. I was hiking alone in Dry Creek Canyon, out in southern Utah. It was early October, and the weather was still warm during the day, but mornings and nights were starting to cool down. I'd planned this trip for weeks. A chance to get away from everything. No phone, no internet, just me and the trail. I'd been out there before, but this time I wanted to push deeper, farther than usual. I got an early start just after dawn, when the sun was still low but brightening the red rock walls all around. The canyon was narrow in spots, with steep sandstone cliffs rising on both sides, and a small dry wash running through the bottom. The vegetation was mostly scrubby bushes and twisted junipers, nothing dense, but enough to keep the place feeling wild. I carried my pack and my camera, hoping to get some shots of the morning light on the rocks. About 3 miles in, after crossing a few sandy patches and climbing a ledge, I saw it. A perfectly circular patch of dead vegetation, maybe 20 feet across. It was odd because the rest of the brush around it was green, or at least not completely brown. But inside that circle, everything was dry and brittle, like it had been scorched, but there was no sign of fire. No blackened ground, no ash, no burnt branches anywhere near it. I stopped, crouched down, and checked the plants carefully. No bugs, no fungi, no holes or signs of disease. It looked like the life just stopped there abruptly. The edges of the circle were too sharp, almost unnatural, like someone had drawn it with a compass. I looked around for footprints or tire tracks or anything human-made. Nothing. No litter, no trash, no signs of hikers or campers. Just that empty circle of dead plants. I walked around it slowly, trying to figure out what could cause that. It wasn't dry from a drought or anything. There were fresh blooms on some of the bushes just a few feet away. I took a few pictures, then kept going. About half a mile past that spot, I started noticing something else. The canyon walls felt quieter. Usually there's bird calls, the buzz of insects, the sound of wind through the leaves. But here it was like all sound was sucked out. I kept stopping and listening. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Just a faint hum, almost like the quiet vibration of electricity or a machine, but I was miles from any power lines or roads. I shrugged it off and tried to focus on the trail. Then I noticed my watch had stopped. Battery was fine. I checked it twice. The little digital screen just went blank. No response. Same with my phone when I pulled it out. Dead. No signal, but that wasn't unusual this far in. Still, the dead screen felt weird. I switched both off and on a couple of times, but no luck. The sun was rising higher now, and I started feeling a little uneasy. It wasn't cold, but a weird chill crawled over my skin. Henry, my black lab mix, was with me. He'd been quiet for a while, just walking close and sniffing the air. Suddenly, he stopped and stared ahead, ears pricked. I turned to see what caught his attention, but there was nothing, just rocks and brush. Then, out of nowhere, the hum got louder. It wasn't mechanical anymore, more like a low tone that vibrated in my chest. Henry whimpered and tucked his tail, looking up at me like something was wrong. I told myself to keep calm. Maybe it was just nerves or the canyon playing tricks on me. I kept hiking, but the feeling didn't go away. After another mile, the trail opened up onto a small plateau, and I saw something else. More dead patches, this time 3 smaller circles arranged in a rough triangle maybe 50 feet apart. Each circle looked just like the first, the plants inside totally dead, no signs of burning or disease. I felt my heart rate pick up. It didn't make sense. I scanned the horizon, no signs of people, no vehicles, no drone noises, no airplanes. The sky was bright blue and cloudless. Henry growled low again and took a step back toward me. I decided I'd had enough and started heading back. As I turned, I thought I saw a shape on the ridge above me, like a dark figure standing still against the rocks. But when I blinked, it was gone. I quickened my pace, trying not to let my imagination run wild. Then came the strange part. I was maybe halfway back when the humming started again, but this time it was accompanied by a faint glow coming from the direction of the biggest circle. Not bright, just a soft bluish light that pulsed slowly. I stopped, looking over my shoulder, but there was no one there. Henry tugged at his leash, anxious, but I kept watching. The glow didn't move or change shape, just pulsed gently. Then the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and the hairs on Henry's neck did too. It was like the air itself was thickening. Suddenly, everything around me seemed quieter, like the sound was slipping away. Even Henry's panting slowed. My vision blurred at the edges, and I had to blink hard to clear it. When I opened my eyes again, the glow was gone. The hum was gone. The birds had started up again somewhere far off. I looked down at my watch. It was working again, the screen alive like nothing had happened. My phone buzzed with a signal. I stared at Henry, who seemed fine but was still looking nervously toward the canyon. We packed up and left the area as fast as I dared, keeping my eyes on every shadow, every rock. I didn't see the figure again or the glow. Back at my car hours later, I checked the photos I'd taken. The circles were there, of course, dead patches of brush, perfectly round. But in some shots, faint distortions appeared, like ripples in the air or heat waves, except the temperature wasn't high. I showed the pictures to a local ranger the next day. He said he'd never heard of anything like that, and that the area hadn't had fires or any strange events recently. No one I talked to had an explanation. Since then, I keep thinking about that glow, the hum, and those circles. Henry won't go near that canyon again, and honestly, neither will I. I still don't know what it was, but whatever it wasn't natural, and it didn't belong there. I was working the night shift at the regional airport control tower. Just another slow Tuesday, or at least I thought so. I'm Tom, air traffic controller, been at it for about 8 years. Mostly working these overnight shifts where the flights thin out and you spend a lot of time watching empty radar screens and waiting for the occasional commuter jet. The airport itself isn't huge, but the airspace I monitor stretches pretty far out. over 100 miles, mostly rural areas and a few small towns. The night started normal. A couple of regional flights taking off, a private jet landing, usual chatter on the radios. Around 2:15 a.m., I was glancing at the radar, running through routine checks, when something caught my eye. A tiny blip appeared out of nowhere on the edge of my radar screen, way farther out than any plane I was expecting. No flight plan filed, no call on the radio, nothing. I paused and double-checked. The blip wasn't there a second ago, then suddenly it popped up maybe 120 miles away. It was moving fast, really fast. I tapped my headset mic, listening in case I missed a call from a pilot or another controller, but silence. No radio traffic, no emergency signals, nothing. I tracked the blip as it zipped across the screen. It moved in a straight line, almost like it was ignoring all normal air routes or restrictions. It covered that whole 120 miles in less than 10 seconds. I tried to calculate speed in my head, easily faster than any commercial plane or private jet allowed in that airspace, faster than anything I'd ever seen tracked before. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the blip vanished. Gone. No descent, no landing, no signal loss. Just completely disappeared. I sat back in my chair, blinking at the screen. For a moment, I thought it was a glitch, or maybe some interference. But the radar system was running normally, no alerts, and the other controllers would have noticed. I glanced over at the assistant controller on the next console. She hadn't noticed anything strange, just scanning her own sector. I didn't say anything at first, not wanting to sound crazy. I pulled up the radar playback, rewound, and watched that segment again. The blip showed up sharp and clear, moving at a speed that didn't make sense. It didn't change altitude, didn't slow down or turn. It was like a laser beam cutting across the radar screen. I checked the airport cameras pointed at the runway and surrounding area. Nothing unusual on them. No lights, no strange reflections, no unexplained movement. Still, the feeling that something was off lingered. After a few minutes, I grabbed a coffee and stepped out on the tower balcony. The night was clear, a crisp fall air with stars spread wide overhead. Nothing was moving except the occasional blinking runway light far below. Back inside, I tried to focus on the rest of my shift, but my mind kept wandering back to that blip. I checked every system I could. Radar logs, communication logs, even weather reports. There was no explanation. Around 3:30 a.m., the radio crackled suddenly. A small private plane pilot was reporting a strange light they'd seen far west of the airport, something moving too fast to be a plane, then vanishing into the night sky. The pilot sounded rattled, but gave no details. I jotted it down, but I didn't mention the radar blip. I tried to call the pilot back, but he was out of radio range by then. The rest of the night passed without incident, but the image of that blip kept playing in my head. Something moving through my airspace at impossible speed, no noise, no communication, no explanation. At dawn, I handed off my shift and went home. I didn't mention the blip to anyone else in the tower, not even my supervisor. I wasn't sure what to say. Later, I checked with the FAA radar techs. No errors reported on their end. No other controllers had seen anything unusual in neighboring sectors. I've thought about it a lot since then. There was no way to track where the blip came from or where it went. No echoes, no debris, no follow-up sightings. Just a brief, impossible blip crossing my screen, and then nothing. I was driving east out of Wichita on a humid summer evening, chasing a line of thunderstorms rolling across Kansas. I've chased storms for years, mostly on weekends when work was slow or just whenever I could. That night it was late July. Sticky, low clouds, and that heavy smell of rain that sticks to your skin even before the storm hits. I'd been tracking a particular cell on my radar app and it was moving pretty fast just to the north of the highway. I found a dirt turnout just off the road near a patch of wheat fields and pulled over. The sky was mostly dark gray, with some breaks where the clouds looked like they were swirling. I set up my tripod and camera, aiming it where the main storm core looked the most active. I wasn't expecting anything weird, just some good lightning shots. The storm rolled in quickly. The air got cooler, but that tension you feel before a big thunderstorm started crawling down my spine. The The wind picked up a little, shifting through the wheat stalks, making that whispering rustle that seems to scream, "Something's coming." Then the lightning started. Sharp, bright, but irregular, the kind you expect from a normal storm. I hit record and kept my eyes on the sky. About 7 minutes in, something caught my eye in the clouds. Something faint at first, almost like a reflection or a flash of metal high in the storm. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light or maybe my eyes playing games with the rain and lightning. But every time a bolt hit, the flash would seem to catch and hold, just for a moment longer than the lightning itself. I wasn't sure what to think, so I kept filming. Then it happened. In under 10 seconds, lightning struck the exact same spot in the wheat field 3 times. I'm not talking about the general area, no, the exact same patch of ground. The first bolt hit, cracking the sky open like a whip crack. The second, just a few seconds later, same place, same spot. The third strike, almost immediately after the second, left me blinking, disbelieving. It was like someone or something was directing the lightning. I kept recording, heart pounding, staring at the footage on my camera's screen between strikes. When the third bolt hit, that metallic glint in the clouds lit up again, this time clearer, like a rounded, shiny shape, but blurred by the storm's motion and rain. It wasn't just light reflecting off water droplets or ice crystals. This was something solid, metallic, with edges and curves that didn't make sense against the jagged, churning clouds around it. I tried zooming in with my camera, but the rain started coming down harder. The wind picked up, and the storm was moving fast. I grabbed my gear, tossed it in the car, and peeled out of the turnout just as the first heavy drops hit the windshield. That night, after I got home, I sat alone in my dark living room, watching the footage on my laptop. The lightning strikes were wild, loud, and bright, but the metal shape in the clouds, it wasn't anything I could identify. It looked like a smooth, curved object, maybe the size of a small plane, but I'd never seen a storm cloud that way. It wasn't a plane, not really. It didn't move or fly. It just hovered in place, caught in the lightning's flash like some strange sculpture carved out of light and shadow. I kept rewinding that part of the video, trying to make sense of it. Every time the lightning struck that patch of ground, the shape shimmered, then disappeared again behind the clouds. I couldn't get back to sleep after that. It was like my brain was stuck on that spot in the storm, the repeated lightning, and that strange metallic shape hiding in the clouds. The next day I went back out to the field. The wheat was scorched, like a black patch maybe 15 feet wide where the lightning had hit. But there was no crater, no debris, no signs anyone had out there before me. Just burnt wheat stalks and a weird silence hanging over the place. I talked to a few locals around town, showed them the footage. Most shrugged it off. Just a weird storm. Lightning can do strange things. But one old guy, Hank, who's been chasing storms his whole life, gave me a look like I'd seen something I shouldn't have. "I've seen storms throw metal before," he said quietly, "but never like that. Usually it's debris from somewhere else, not hanging in the clouds." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer, just shook his head. Over the next week, I kept checking the footage, staring at the same frames, looking for anything I'd missed. The metallic shape never changed position or moved, and no other storms I chased after that looked anything like that. I thought about going back to the spot, but something stopped me, like the field was off limits somehow. At night, I'd sometimes hear a faint buzzing or humming that I couldn't explain, especially when I looked at the sky on stormy evenings. The sound wasn't loud, more like the high-pitched whine of distant electrical equipment, but it never matched any appliance or car or radio. I know what you're thinking. Storm chasing's a dangerous hobby. Sometimes you get odd results from weather phenomena or camera glitches. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a weird lens flare, but the thing is, the lightning hit the same spot 3 times in under 10 seconds. That's statistically crazy. And that shape in the clouds, I've never seen anything like it. It didn't fit with any plane, drone, or natural weather pattern. I still get a little uneasy thinking about that night, about the silence in that scorched patch of wheat, and the way the storm seemed to focus on one point like it was drawing a map only it could read. I've kept chasing storms since then, but I never got a shot like that again. The storm came and went, but that strange metallic flash stayed in the back of my mind like a question I can't answer. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear that faint hum again, drifting in from somewhere far above the clouds. I woke up that morning with a pounding headache and my nose dripping blood onto the pillow. At first, I thought maybe I'd hit my head in my sleep or something, but when I sat up and wiped at my face, I noticed something else. On my right shoulder, just where my shirt had been riding up, there were these weird reddish marks. They looked like burns, but not the usual kind, more like a pattern, like someone had pressed a stencil or a stamp against my skin. It was made up of a bunch of tiny triangles and lines, kind of like those old geometric puzzles you see in design books or tattoos, but I'd never seen anything like it on a person. I didn't remember anything strange before I went to bed. I'd fallen asleep like usual in my room with my dog Juno curled up at the foot of the bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. The night had been quiet, except maybe for some distant thunder, but I wasn't sure. I tried to stand but got lightheaded fast. The headache was sharp, and the blood from my nose kept coming in slow drips. I called out for my mom, who came in a few minutes later, clearly worried. "Where did you hit yourself?" she asked, pulling back my shirt to see the marks. "I didn't hit anything. I don't know what this is," I said, touching the strange pattern lightly. It felt warm, but not painful. It didn't look like a rash, and there was no swelling or blistering. She cleaned me up and took me to the urgent care clinic nearby. The doctor examined me thoroughly. Nosebleed, dehydration maybe, but nothing that explained the marks on my shoulder. They ran some scans and blood tests, but everything came back normal. No burns, no skin damage visible on the scans, nothing. That's what freaked me out the most. The pattern was right there on my skin, but the machines showed nothing, like the marks were just on the surface, or maybe my skin was playing tricks. The doctor said it might be an allergic reaction or something minor that would go away, but the nosebleed combined with the marks didn't make much sense. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal at school, but all I could think about was that shoulder. By evening, the redness had started fading, and by the next morning, it was almost gone, like it never happened. I checked the mirror carefully, looking for any trace of the geometric shapes, but there was nothing, just my regular skin, pale from not sleeping well. At first I thought maybe it was some kind of weird allergic reaction to detergent or a bug bite, but no one else in the house was affected, and I hadn't changed anything recently. That night I kept Juno close, and whenever I looked at my shoulder, I felt this weird chill. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion. Like my body had done something strange while I wasn't paying attention. I started paying attention to little things after that. Like how sometimes when I was alone in my room, I'd hear soft tapping noises, like someone knocking lightly on the walls. But when I checked, no one was there. Or how my phone would occasionally glitch, freezing on strange static patterns for a few seconds before coming back to normal. At school, some kids made jokes about me having secret symbols, or alien tattoos, which made me roll my eyes, but inside I wondered if maybe they were onto something, or if I was just losing it. I told my parents, but they mostly chalked it up to stress. I had been having trouble sleeping and focusing lately, but that didn't explain the nosebleed or the marks. One night a week later, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when Juno suddenly jumped up. Ears perked, staring at the corner of my room near the window. The air felt colder there, like a draft, even though the window was shut tight. The lights flickered briefly, and then the tapping started again. I didn't see anything, but my skin crawled. I tried to shake it off as nerves and went back to sleep. The next morning, I noticed a faint scar in the shape of one of those triangles on my shoulder. It was barely visible, like a faint scratch. When I showed my mom, she didn't notice it at first, but when she looked closer, she got this worried look on her face. We went back to the doctor, who said the skin was healing normally, but still no explanation for the pattern or why it appeared in the first place. The whole thing stuck with me for months. The nosebleed never came back, and the scars faded completely after a few weeks, but the memories of that night, the marks, the tapping, the cold spot felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Sometimes when I'm alone in my room and the light is just right, I swear I can feel that cold draft near the window again, and if I look closely, shadows seem to move just a little too fast in the corner of my vision. I don't know what it means or if anyone else has experienced something like this, but it changed how I see things. Sometimes the world hides things just beyond what we can explain, and maybe that's okay. That's all I've got. Just a nosebleed, some strange marks, and a few nights that felt off. It was just past midnight when I first heard it. The clicking. Soft, rhythmic, almost like someone tapping their nails very gently on the outside of the window pane. I was lying in bed, half awake, half dozing off. My apartment's on the second floor, overlooking the alley behind the building. Usually the alley is quiet at night, except for the occasional stray cat or the distant hum of a car on the main road. But this clicking wasn't normal. It wasn't the usual background noise. It was steady, deliberate, and it felt like it was coming right up against the window. I lay there for a minute, listening, trying to convince myself it was just something mundane, maybe a branch brushing against the glass or a loose shutter flapping in the wind. But the wind had died down hours ago, and the trees around my building weren't near that side. The sound stopped the second I reached over to pull the blinds up. I stared out into the alley, but there was nothing there, just the dim light from the street lamp casting long, lazy shadows. No one, no movement. Then, without warning, the whole apartment went black. The power cut out. At first I thought it was a fuse or a blown breaker, but it was total blackout. No emergency lights, no electronics, no street lights outside either. The silence was immediate, thick and deep, as if the world had been paused. I checked my phone. No signal, no power, nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it went out, everything flickered back on. 11 seconds, according to my internal clock. No longer, no shorter. I sat up in bed, heart racing, trying to make sense of it. The clicking was gone and the power was back, but something about it felt off, like I'd been watched. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on that window, waiting for the clicking to return, but it didn't. I even left the blinds open overnight a couple of times, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was, but nothing. Still, the feeling lingered. Every time I passed by that window during the day, I felt like something was just beyond my sight, something waiting. One night, I heard the clicking again, same soft rhythm, but this time I didn't pull the blinds. I just sat in the dark and listened. The clicking stopped again as soon as I touched the window, but no blackout followed. I'm still not sure what I heard or why the power went out that night, just that it happened and that for a moment, the world felt not quite right. I didn't plan on noticing the lawn lights that morning. Usually, I'm half asleep, rushing to get coffee and get my day started before my job at the library kicks in. But that day, when I opened the back door to let Jasper out, something felt off. Jasper, my border collie mix, he's got this rusty brown coat and a white patch on his chest. Not your typical dog, more cautious than friendly with strangers. He stopped dead at the edge of the patio. Usually, he bolts out into the yard the second the door cracks open, circling around, sniffing everything, digging holes where he's not supposed to. But that morning, he just froze, ears flat and tail tucked low. I followed his gaze down the lawn where the pathway lights are set. Those little solar-powered stakes I put in last summer. They're supposed to line the stone walkway from the deck to the garden gate, soft, warm light every night. Except this time, none of them were on, which was weird since it was a bright, cloudless morning. I walked over and checked the bulbs. They weren't broken, not a single crack or sign of damage. The glass was clear, the bulbs looked perfect. I twisted one out to look closer and it was completely fine. No scorch marks, no melted plastic, no burnt smell, nothing. I replaced the bulb, figuring maybe the batteries died or the solar cells were just crap. But as I went from light to light, the same thing happened. Each bulb intact, but totally dead. Jasper stayed close to the porch, refusing to move closer to the path. I tried calling him, but he growled low and backed up a little, looking past me as if something was standing just beyond the garden gate. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe he smelled a raccoon or a neighborhood cat. But then I noticed how silent it was out there. The usual morning hum of birds and bugs was missing. Not one chirp, no rustling leaves, just this weird, unnatural quiet that sat heavy around the yard. I went back inside to grab my phone and take a picture of the lights, mostly for my landlord, since they weren't working and I wanted a replacement. When I got back out, Jasper was staring harder now, his whole body stiff. I looked around but saw nothing. I figured maybe I was tired or paranoid and decided to go about my day. That evening, I took Jasper for a walk. It was a cool, foggy dusk, perfect for being outside but with that weird kind of mist that dulls the streetlights. On the way back, I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, standing on her porch, staring at my yard with this uneasy look. She waved when I passed and said, "That light situation out there? Been off all day?" I nodded, feeling awkward. "Yeah, they're just not working and the bulbs aren't even burnt out." She frowned. "Funny thing is, my lights did the same a few nights ago, but I just thought it was the storm messing with the wiring." I thanked her and kept walking, but now the quiet was gnawing at me. It kept tugging me along, clearly wanting to get inside fast. That night, I checked the lawn lights again. No sign of power, not even a flicker. I tried replacing the batteries, but the new ones didn't help. Jasper refused to go anywhere near the path, sitting by the back door and whining softly if I tried to coax him out. A few days passed, and the bulbs stayed dead. I asked a handyman to look at the wiring. There was none. They're solar powered, remember? So no electrical faults to find. What bothered me was Jasper. He wouldn't run around or play outside like usual. If I threw his ball near the lights, he'd stare at it but wouldn't chase it. Once he even backed up against the house, teeth bared, growling at nothing. I started noticing small things around the yard too. Little depressions in the grass near the path, perfect circles where nothing grew, like the earth itself had been burned or poisoned, but the soil was dry and warm to the touch. No footprints, no signs of digging, just these round dead spots. One evening, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, watching Jasper sniff around the garden's edge. The fog had rolled in thick again, and the streetlights blurred into orange halos. Suddenly, I heard a faint buzzing sound coming from the direction of the dead spots. It was low, almost like a swarm of insects, but when I looked closer, there was nothing. Jasper's ears perked up, and he stared into the fog, muscles taut. I wanted to get up, but I felt glued to the chair. The buzzing stopped as suddenly as it started. I got up and flicked on the porch light. That's when I noticed the shadows, shapes just outside the yard, shifting slightly in the fog, like dark figures but with no clear outline. I blinked, and they were gone. That night, I barely slept. Jasper stayed close, occasionally letting out low whines toward the windows. The next morning, I decided to take a walk with him in the woods behind the house, hoping the fresh air would shake this feeling. On the trail, the sun was cutting through the trees in thin beams, the woods alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. Jasper was more relaxed, sniffing every tree. But when we got back to the yard, he froze again by the dead spots. I knelt down and touched one of the circles. The grass felt brittle, like it had been dead for weeks, but I'd watered the lawn every day. No explanation. That evening, the same fog rolled in, heavier this time, and the buzzing came back, louder and closer. I swear I could see faint, blinking lights floating just above the dead spots, like fireflies, but too steady and too synchronized. I grabbed Jasper and dragged him inside, locking the doors. Over the next few days, things got stranger. The dead circles grew, slowly spreading along the walkway. Jasper refused to leave the house, whining and pacing. One night, I swear I heard faint tapping on the window near the yard, just a soft rhythm, but when I looked, there was no one. Eventually, I had a friend, Carla, come by. She's not the type to freak out easily. She inspected the dead patches, the lights, even tried to find critters or insects that might explain the buzzing or the dead grass. She found nothing. Maybe it's some kind of mold or fungus, she suggested, but nothing showed up on the soil samples she took. She stayed the night. And when the fog came in again, she saw the blinking lights too. We watched them from the kitchen window, little clusters of soft white and blue, moving just above the ground, then fading out one by one. Neither of us could explain it. After a week, I replaced the lawn lights with new ones wired to the house power, but they still wouldn't turn on near the dead patches. Lights farther away worked fine. Jasper wouldn't even go near the edge of the yard without me holding him. Eventually, the dead patches stopped growing and the buzzing disappeared, but the lights on that side of the yard never worked again. I don't know what caused it. I don't know what those lights were or why Jasper was so afraid. I just know that every time I look at the lawn now, I see those dark spots and remember the silence that fell over the yard, the buzzing that wasn't insects, and the way Jasper wouldn't go near it. I keep the porch light on at night now, just in case. I woke up around 3:30 in the morning because my dog Keller started whining at the foot of the bed. He's not the type to make noise unless he really needs something. He's a big mutt, mostly shepherd and pretty low maintenance. At first I thought maybe he had to go out, but when I sat up, he wasn't even looking at me. He was staring straight down the hall toward the kitchen. Ears stiff, tail tucked. I live alone in a small ranch-style place just outside Athens, Georgia. Nothing fancy. 1 floor, 3 bedrooms, backyard that slopes into some brush. I've got motion lights out back, deadbolts on all the doors, and a home security system that pings my phone if anything triggers. It's not the kind of setup that should be easy to mess with. I got out of bed and stood there for a minute, just listening. Keller didn't move. He just kept staring. I didn't hear anything. No creaking, no shuffling, no voices. But something felt wrong. I know that sounds vague, but the air in the house felt still. Not quiet. Still. Like every molecule had frozen in place. I finally walked down the hall. Didn't turn on the lights yet. Just let my eyes adjust and moved slow. Every cabinet in the kitchen was open. Every drawer, too. Wide open. Some hanging all the way out like someone had yanked them fast. The fridge door stood open, same with the dishwasher, pantry wide. Even the damn bread box had the lid propped up. I checked the living room, same thing. The TV stand drawers, the little cabinet where I keep extra cables, the sliding closet by the front door. All open. I turned back to the hallway. Bathroom door open, closet door open, guest room, office, both wide open. Nothing ransacked though, nothing looked stolen or even moved, just opened, like someone was checking inside everything. That's when I felt the floor under me vibrate, just slightly, like a low hum you feel more than hear. It lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds, then stopped. Keller finally moved then. He slunk back to my bedroom and lay down facing the door. I walked around the house again, slower this time, checking for signs of forced entry. All the windows were still locked, front and back doors locked. Nothing broken. The motion lights in the backyard hadn't triggered. I pulled up the security app on my phone. The interior sensors had gone off at 3:11 a.m., but the system flagged it as a false alarm, no breach. The timeline showed everything green except for a 47-second gap in the camera feed from the living room. Right at 3:11, the feed just jumped from one frame to another. No black screen, just skipped. I sat on the couch and replayed it 5 or 6 times, trying to see if anything changed between the frames, but all I could tell was that the living room lamp was slightly shifted in the second frame, like an inch to the left. I started closing everything. Drawers, cabinet doors, fridge. Didn't turn on the TV, didn't even turn on music. It felt like if I made too much noise, something might notice. At 4:02, every motion light in the backyard came on at once. I froze, walked over to the window by the sink and looked out. Couldn't see anything at first, just glare from the floodlights bouncing off the dew-covered grass. Then I saw the trees at the back of the yard swaying a little. Not like wind blowing them, more like they'd just finished moving. I grabbed the flashlight from under the sink and stepped out onto the deck. Keller stayed behind. Usually he follows me everywhere, even to take the trash out. This time he didn't even get up. The light stayed on, but nothing triggered. I stood out there for maybe 10 minutes, sweeping the flashlight back and forth. No eye shine, no movement, no sound, just those trees and the quiet. When I came back inside, the air felt normal again. Not warm, not cold, just neutral. Keller finally stood up and went to his bowl. I watched him eat and tried to convince myself I'd slept through someone trying to rob the place. But again, nothing was missing. I decided to check the attic, even though the entry hatch hadn't been touched. I pulled down the ladder and climbed up the flashlight. It's not a full attic, just crawl space with insulation and a few boxes. There was a smell up there that wasn't there before. Not rot, not mold. It was like scorched electronics, maybe. Like when an old speaker shorts out. And the insulation in the far corner looked disturbed. Slightly flattened, like something had pressed down on it, and then that was enough for me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I left all the lights on, locked everything again, and sat in the living room with Keller next to me, just waiting for the sun to come up. I called the security company first thing in the morning. The guy on the phone checked the logs and confirmed the 47-second drop. He said it wasn't a power issue. Said everything else stayed online. Just the camera feed interrupted and resumed like nothing happened. He offered to send someone out to replace the equipment, but I said no. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Gentry, if she'd seen or heard anything. She's in her 70s, lives alone, and never sleeps through a night. She said she noticed the backyard lights flick on around 4 a.m., but figured it was just Keller out there. No vehicles. No people. I went through the house that afternoon with a fine-toothed comb. Nothing new turned up. No fingerprints, no scuffs on the floors or sills, no signs of forced anything. That night, I didn't open the blinds, didn't watch TV, just stayed quiet. At 3:11 a.m. exactly, the living room light flickered once and came back on. Keller lifted his head but didn't get up. I checked the cameras again. No drops. Everything stayed normal. But in the kitchen, on the counter I'd wiped spotless that afternoon, there were 3 small circles. Not drawn, not burned, just clean. Like something had been resting there and left a perfectly round imprint, slightly drier than the rest of the surface. Each one was about the size of a quarter. I cleaned them and went back to the couch. Keller eventually lay back down. I didn't move the rest of the night. I'd been hunting up in the Allegheny National Forest for years, close to 20 by that point, and I'd never seen anything I couldn't explain. Not once. I'm not saying I'm some expert woodsman, but I know what a bear sounds like walking through brush. I know what coyotes sound like at night. I know how deer behave when they sense something's off. This thing wasn't any of those. It was late October when it happened. I'd gone up on a solo weekend trip, partly for hunting, partly just to get out of the house. My wife was visiting her sister in Pittsburgh, and I figured I'd take the dog Juno and spend a couple nights at the old lean-to I'd built with my brother back in college. It was basic, 3 walls and a tin roof. But it stayed dry, and it was deep enough in the forest that I never saw another person. Juno's a black lab mix, mostly mellow but good at alerting me if anything's around. She doesn't bark much unless something's really wrong, which is why what happened later stuck with me. The first night was uneventful. Clear skies, cold enough that I kept the fire going into the early morning. I set up a trail cam about 100 yards northeast of the lean-to, where I'd spotted a good scrape line earlier in the month. I wasn't really expecting much. It was late in the season and I hadn't baited, but I figured maybe I'd get lucky. The trail cam was just a mid-range Browning, the kind that takes both stills and short bursts of video on motion. I strapped it to a birch about chest height, aimed it toward the clearing, and tested the angle with my phone. All good. I left it running overnight. Around 4:30 a.m., Juno sat up suddenly and stared off into the trees. No growl, no whining. Just totally still, ears forward, head tilted slightly. I was half awake and figured it was a raccoon or a deer moving through. But the fire had burned low, and there was no crunching in the leaves, no animal sounds at all, just quiet, like real quiet, the kind where you notice how loud your own breathing is. Even the wind had stopped. I sat up and listened. Juno didn't move. She just kept watching the same direction, toward where I'd put the camera. I held still for a few more minutes, then whispered, "You hear something?" She didn't react. Didn't even flick her tail. I eventually chalked it up to a deer and laid back down, but she stayed sitting like that until dawn. The next day, I didn't see a single buck. I hiked a few miles out, circled back around, checked for fresh sign. Nothing. Even the squirrels were quiet. Not much bird activity either. It was strange, but sometimes that's how it goes. That evening, I pulled the SD card from the trail cam and popped in a fresh one. I brought the card back to the lean-to, set up the little solar charger I used to run my tablet, and loaded the footage. There wasn't much. A few clips of wind shaking branches, one short video of a rabbit hopping by around 1 a.m., then a still image, one single frame. It was time-stamped 4:42 a.m., right around when Juno sat up. The picture showed the clearing, just like I expected. But in the center of the frame, about 6 feet off the ground, was this perfect glowing sphere. Not a light from something. The thing was the light. It didn't cast any shadow, just hovered there. White-blue, perfectly round, no detail, no shape around it, not a drone, not a lens flare. I know how lens flare looks on these things, and this wasn't that. The next frame was just black. No error message, no corruption, just cut off. I checked the video immediately after the still, and the feed was dead, like the camera shut off mid-capture. I walked back to the camera to make sure it hadn't fallen or gotten knocked over. Still strapped tight, battery full, SD card intact. It was like it had just quit for 20 minutes, then picked back up around 5 a.m. like nothing happened. That's when I noticed something else. The ground in the clearing, right under where the orb had been, was dry. Everything else was damp from the night air, but there was this circular patch, maybe 2 feet wide, completely dry. Pine needles and leaves around it were slightly curled, like they'd been heated. No burn marks, just dried out. Juno wouldn't step into the clearing. She followed me to the edge and then stopped, hackles up, low whine in her throat. Wouldn't go closer. I stood there a while, just looking. Then I backed off and went back to camp. That night I didn't sleep much. I didn't build a fire, didn't cook anything. Just sat with Juno in the dark, listening. Around midnight, I started hearing this faint humming, real low, like a power line in the distance. It wasn't constant. It would start up for a few seconds, then fade out. Came from the same direction as the clearing. I thought maybe it was wind again, but the trees weren't moving. No leaves rustling, no air. I almost packed up and left right then, but I stayed, mostly because I didn't want to hike out in the dark. I kept the rifle loaded and sat with my back to the lean-to wall, watching the tree line. Around 2:15, Juno growled. Not loud, just a low, quiet warning in her chest. Then the humming started again, louder this time. It was like it was inside the trees, not behind them, not above, in them. Hard to explain. I didn't see anything move, no lights, no shadows, just that sound and Juno pressing into my leg. It stopped after maybe 10 minutes, no fade out, just gone. We left at first light. I didn't check the new SD card, didn't want to see what else it caught. I just packed everything up, left the camera where it was, and hiked out as fast as I could without looking like I was running. When I got home, I downloaded the original image and zoomed in. Tried everything, adjusted contrast, checked metadata, ran it through a couple apps. Nothing new showed up, just that glowing ball. Perfectly smooth. No features. I emailed the photo to my brother. He's a software engineer and usually pretty skeptical about stuff like this. He looked at it and said it was probably a camera malfunction. But then he asked what caused the dry spot and why the video feed cut out in the middle of the shot. I didn't have an answer. I haven't gone back to that clearing since, not even to grab the camera. I think it's probably still out there, strapped to that birch, recording trees and wind like nothing ever happened. Sometimes I think about going back, bringing someone else with me, setting up multiple cameras, running thermal imaging, the whole deal. But I don't, because whatever was out there that night, I don't think it wanted to be seen twice. The power went out just after 9. I was in the kitchen rinsing out a thermos when everything clicked off at once. Lights, fridge hum, even the clock radio on the shelf. We'd had outages before, but never in summer. Usually it was during ice storms or wind shears in November. This was July. Still air, no lightning, no warning. My dog Cricket perked up from her spot by the door. She's a mutt, part beagle, part something bigger. Always reacts to sounds before I hear them, but this time she just sat up stiff and stared toward the window. I remember that clearly because it wasn't like her. She didn't bark or whine, just watched. I stepped outside with a flashlight, thinking maybe the whole block was down, but there was nothing. Just that kind of deep, unnatural quiet that hits after the AC units stop and no one's got a TV on. The houses across the street were dark. Same with the corner store 2 blocks over. I could just make out the silhouette of the water tower behind the trees at the edge of town, but it was hard to see anything else. Cricket stayed by the door, halfway in, halfway out, like she didn't want to follow me but didn't want to be left behind either. I stood in the yard a bit, expecting to hear generators kick on, or at least someone outside talking about it, but it stayed dead quiet. Even the bugs had gone still. That's what really struck me. No crickets, no cicadas, just stillness. Then I saw the blue light. It wasn't dramatic, no flash, no beam. Just a soft, steady blue floating right above the water tower, maybe 30-40 feet above the dome. It looked like a lantern hanging in midair. Pale blue, almost washed out, but clearly not a star. Too low, too big. I stared at it for a full minute before I realized Cricket was growling behind me. Real low, barely audible. I turned and told her to hush, but she wouldn't come away from the door. Back when I was a kid, that tower was the tallest thing around. I used to ride my bike past it with my cousins. There's a dirt maintenance road that goes right up to the base. It's fenced off now, but not heavily. Just a chain link with a weak padlock. Everyone in town's been up there at least once, even if they don't admit it. I cut through the backyard and took the trail behind the old O'Neill place. It was humid and pitch dark. My flashlight beam barely reached 20 feet, but I kept walking. About halfway to the tower, I started hearing movement in the brush. Not animal movement, footsteps, slow and cautious. I stopped, listened, and heard nothing. Then, after a few steps, there it was again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I kept walking, faster now. When I got to the clearing near the base of the tower, I saw at least 7 or 8 other people standing there already, all locals. Some I recognized. Janine, who runs the diner, Matt from the feed store, one of the Clements boys. A few were in their pajamas. No one spoke. They were all staring straight up. I looked up again and the light was still there, hovering in place. It wasn't moving at all. No wobble, no flicker. Just a perfect blue sphere about the size of a car tire. It didn't cast light the way a bulb would. It was bright, but the glow didn't spread. You could look right at it without squinting. After a minute or two, someone behind me said, "What is that?" No one answered. We stood there for maybe 15 more minutes. A couple more people arrived. The light never moved. Eventually, one of the Clements boys, Jamie, I think, pulled out his phone to record, but the screen stayed black. No signal, no flashlight, nothing. Someone else tried their phone. Same thing. Dead. That's when we realized none of us had signal and nobody had heard any cars on the road. Normally, at least one person would have driven out to check the station or call the sheriff, but no one had passed. Not even a tractor. Someone said maybe it was a drone, but it had no sound, not even a whisper. You'd think something hovering that steady would have to hum or push air or flash. This didn't. A guy I didn't know started yelling up at it. Just nonsense, like, "What do you want?" And "Come down here." No response. No movement. After a while, people started getting antsy. A few walked back into town. I stayed, along with maybe 4 others. I didn't want to look away, like if I blinked, it would disappear. Then something shifted. The air got heavy, like pressure before a storm, but without wind or clouds. My ears popped. I looked around and saw the others rubbing their necks like something was buzzing under their skin. It wasn't sound, exactly, more like your bones reacting to a subwoofer. That's the only way I can describe it. Then, the light bent. It didn't move in the normal sense. It kind of elongated, stretched into a thinner oval, and then snapped back to a sphere. But not like a lens or an illusion. The object itself changed shape for a second. We all saw it, one of the women gasped. Right after that, a second light blinked on. Same color, same size, maybe 100 feet to the left of the first one. They just sat there like twin stars, but way too close to Earth. Way too still. I decided I'd seen enough. I backed away and walked the trail home fast, kept the flashlight low. No one spoke on the way back. Even when I passed a guy on the path, somebody's uncle, I think, we just nodded like it was any other night. Back at the house, the power was still out. Cricket was pacing near the door, panting a little, not whining, not barking, just walking circles. I lit a candle and sat at the table, listening for anything. Engines, sirens, even frogs. But it stayed quiet. Around 11:30, the lights came back on. No flicker, no delay, just back, like nothing happened. AC kicked on. Radio on the shelf lit up. Cricket calmed down instantly, went to her blanket, and curled up. The next morning, I went into town. No one said much, but everyone looked tired. Janine gave me coffee on the house. Matt said, "Your power come back around midnight?" I nodded. That was all we said. By noon, word had gotten around that half the town had seen the blue light. Some from their porches, some through bedroom windows. All above the tower, same color, same stillness. No one had footage. No one's phone had worked. The local news never covered it. By the next week, no one was talking about it anymore. Like they'd decided it wasn't worth figuring out. Or maybe they didn't want to. The water tower's still there. Still quiet. I drive past it on my way to work and never look up. I'd pulled off onto the overlook around 9:30. That stretch of Route 219 runs through the Allegheny Mountains, and I used to drive it a lot coming back from my dad's place in Myersdale. It's mostly curves and pines and not much else once you're north of town, but there's a turnout about 10 miles up that gives a nice view of the valley. I stopped there sometimes when I didn't feel like going home just yet. That night was quiet. Early April, a little chilly but clear. You could see your breath outside, and the moon was low and orange, kind of hiding behind some streaky clouds. I parked facing the edge, killed the engine, and rolled the window down. Didn't plan to stay long, just wanted to breathe some air that didn't smell like coffee or old cigarettes. There's no cell reception up there, which I've always liked. Just a narrow 2-lane road and the wind through trees. I was sitting there maybe 15 minutes, just watching the treetops shift in the breeze, when I caught headlights behind me in the mirror. I figured someone else was pulling in. The lights came around the bend slow, just the way you'd expect, bouncing a little from the uneven pavement. I watched them move up the road, steady and normal. It's a short stretch, about 100 yards from the bend to the turnout, and I waited for them to appear behind me, maybe park alongside. But they didn't. The lights kept shining, getting closer, but the car never came around the curve. They just hovered there, like the vehicle was stuck just out of sight. I craned my neck and looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the glow, still angled like it was mid-turn, low and golden like any pair of halogens. I thought maybe the driver had stopped in the lane. I turned off the interior light and sat still, figuring I'd wait until they passed or pulled in. But after another minute or so, the lights started to dim. Not flicker, dim, like someone was turning a dial down slowly. They faded until they were gone completely, and the bend behind me was just dark again. I waited. No sound. No engine, no gravel crunching, nothing. I got out of the truck and walked toward the back, figuring I'd hear something once I stepped out, but it was dead quiet except for the wind in the trees. I stood there a while, listening. Didn't even hear any birds. Eventually I got back in and shut the door. Locked it too. Not sure why. I didn't feel scared exactly, just wired. Like my body had picked up on something my brain hadn't caught yet. After maybe 5 minutes, I turned the truck back on and kept driving north. I didn't see another car the whole rest of the way home. A few days later, I drove back out during the day just to see the spot again. I kept thinking maybe I'd find some fresh tire marks or something out of place, but it looked exactly the same. The road was dry, the turnout was empty, nothing unusual. I mentioned it to my brother Cal just casually while we were working on his fence. He said it was probably someone playing around with a spotlight or hiding off the side, but the road's narrow and there's no shoulder. No way to pull off without ending up in the brush. And even if someone wanted to prank a random driver at a turnout at night, why do it silently and then vanish? I stopped going out there after dark for a while. Took the longer route home through Johnstown instead. I don't really believe in anything weird, not like that, but I also can't explain why I never heard a car or saw it pass. Whatever it was, those lights looked real. But there was no car. I was driving east out of Wichita on a humid summer evening, chasing a line of thunderstorms rolling across Kansas. I've chased storms for years, mostly on weekends when work was slow or just whenever I could. That night, It was late July, sticky, low clouds, and that heavy smell of rain that sticks to your skin even before the storm hits. I'd been tracking a particular cell on my radar app, and it was moving pretty fast, just to the north of the highway. I found a dirt turnout just off the road near a patch of wheat fields and pulled over. The sky was mostly dark gray with some breaks where the clouds looked like they were swirling. I set up my tripod and camera, aiming it where the main storm core looked the most active. I wasn't expecting anything weird, just some good lightning shots. The storm rolled in quickly. The air got cooler, but that tension you feel before a big thunderstorm started crawling down my spine. The wind picked up a little, shifting through the wheat stalks, making that whispering rustle that seems to scream, "Something's coming." Then the lightning started. Sharp, bright, but irregular, the kind you expect from a normal storm. I hit record and kept my eyes on the sky. About 7 minutes in, something caught my eye in the clouds, something faint at first, almost like a reflection or a flash of metal high in the storm. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light, or maybe my eyes playing games with the rain and lightning. But every time a bolt hit, the flash would seem to catch and hold just for a moment longer than the lightning itself. I wasn't sure what to think, so I kept filming. Then it happened. In under 10 seconds, lightning struck the exact same spot in the wheat field 3 times. I'm not talking about the general area, no, the exact same patch of ground. The first bolt hit, cracking the sky open like a whip crack. The second, just a few seconds later, same place, same spot. The third strike, almost immediately after the second, left me blinking, disbelieving. It was like someone or something was directing the lightning. I kept recording, heart pounding, staring at the footage on my camera's screen between strikes. When the third bolt hit, that metallic glint in the clouds lit up again, this time clearer, like a rounded, shiny shape, but blurred by the storm's motion and rain. It wasn't just light reflecting off water droplets or ice crystals. This was something solid, metallic, with edges and curves that didn't make sense against the jagged, churning clouds around it. I tried zooming in with my camera, but the rain started coming down harder. The wind picked up, and the storm was moving fast. I grabbed my gear, tossed it in the car, and peeled out of the turnout just as the first heavy drops hit the windshield. That night, after I got home, I sat alone in my dark living room, watching the footage on my laptop. The lightning strikes were wild, loud, and bright, but the metal shape in the clouds, it wasn't anything I could identify. It looked like a smooth, curved object, maybe the size of a small plane, but I'd never seen a storm cloud that way. It wasn't a plane, not really. It didn't move or fly. It just hovered in place, caught in the lightning's flash like some strange sculpture carved out of light and shadow. I kept rewinding that part of the video, trying to make sense of it. Every time the lightning struck that patch of ground, the shape shimmered, then disappeared again behind the clouds. I couldn't get back to sleep after that. It was like my brain was stuck on that spot in the storm, the repeated lightning, and that strange metallic shape hiding in the clouds. The next day I went back out to the field. The wheat was scorched, like a black patch maybe 15 feet wide where the lightning had hit. But there was no crater, no debris, no signs anyone had been out there before me. Just burnt wheat stalks and a weird silence hanging over the place. I talked to a few locals around town, showed them the footage. Most shrugged it off. Just a weird storm. Lightning can do strange things. But one old guy, Hank, who's been chasing storms his whole life, gave me a look like I'd seen something I shouldn't have. "I've seen storms throw metal before," he said quietly, "but never like that. Usually it's debris from somewhere else, not hanging in the clouds." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer, just shook his head. Over the next week, I kept checking the footage, staring at the same frames, looking for anything I'd missed. The metallic shape never changed position or moved, and no other storms I chased after that looked anything like that. I thought about going back to the spot, but something stopped me, like the field was off limits somehow. At night, I'd sometimes hear a faint buzzing or humming that I couldn't explain, especially when I looked at the sky on stormy evenings. The sound wasn't loud, more like the high-pitched whine of distant electrical equipment, but it never matched any appliance or car or radio. I know what you're thinking. Storm chasing's a dangerous hobby. Sometimes you get odd results from weather phenomena or camera glitches. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a weird lens flare. But the thing is, the lightning hit the same spot 3 times in under 10 seconds. That's statistically crazy. And that shape in the clouds, I've never seen anything like it. It didn't fit with any plane, drone, or natural weather pattern. I still get a little uneasy thinking about that night, about the silence in that scorched patch of wheat, and the way the storm seemed to focus on one point, like it was drawing a map only it could read. I've kept chasing storms since then, but I never got a shot like that again. The storm came and went, but that strange metallic flash stayed in the back of my mind like a question I can't answer. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear that faint hum again, drifting in from somewhere far above the clouds. I'd been hiking alone up in the Adirondacks that October. It was one of those clear, crisp, early fall days where the leaves are just starting to turn and the air smells like damp earth and pine. I usually go hiking by myself. It's the only time I get to think without distractions. I brought my old lab, Luna, along, a little rescue who's surprisingly spry for her age. She loves the woods. I started the trail around mid-morning, just me and Luna, winding through the dense trees. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. A few birds called off in the distance, leaves rustled underfoot, but mostly it was just us and the trail. About 3 miles in, I stopped at a clearing with a small hill that gave me a good view over the canopy. Luna plopped down next to me, panting softly. I sat on a rock and pulled out a water bottle. That's when I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe a shadow shifting. But then I saw it, a large black triangular shape, hovering just above the treetops, maybe 50 yards out. It wasn't moving, at least not in any way I could tell. It was totally silent, no buzzing, no engine noise, nothing. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks, or maybe it was some kind of weird drone. But this thing wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It was completely matte black, like it was absorbing the light around it instead of reflecting any. The edges were sharp, too perfect, almost like someone cut out a triangle out of a piece of black paper and just held it there in the air. Luna stiffened beside me, her ears perked up, staring in the same direction. She didn't bark or whine, just tense and alert. I pulled my phone out, aiming to snap a picture, but as I unlocked it and turned the camera on, the thing blinked out, like a TV going off, just suddenly gone. No sound, no movement, just disappeared. I sat frozen, staring at the empty treetops where it had been. Luna nudged my hand, and I could feel my heart pounding hard. It wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. No flashing lights, no strange sounds, just that dead black shape hovering, then gone. I looked around, trying to see if anything else had changed. The forest was the same, quiet, normal. The wind picked up slightly, rustling leaves, but that was it. I stayed at the clearing for maybe 10 more minutes, watching and listening. Nothing. No sign of the triangle or anything else unusual. I packed up and started back down the trail with Luna close beside me. On the way back, I kept glancing behind, half expecting to see it reappear, but the trees were just trees. That night, when I got home, I checked my phone. No pictures. The camera app hadn't saved anything, like I never took a photo. I showed Luna the spot from the living room window. She looked out but didn't react. I've been back to that clearing a couple of times since then. No sign of it, but sometimes when I'm walking alone, I get that same feeling, like something's watching just beyond the edge of what I can see. Not threatening exactly, but definitely not natural. And Luna, she won't go near that part of the woods anymore. If I try to take her there, she stops and stares, refusing to move forward. I don't know what I saw that day. Maybe it was a trick of light or something man-made, but I know it wasn't normal. It felt wrong in a way I can't explain. So yeah, that's my story. A silent black triangle that just blinked out like a screen shutting off. No smoke, no noise, no trace, just gone. I'd pulled off onto the overlook around 9:30. That stretch of Route 210-119 runs through the Allegheny Mountains, and I used to drive it a lot coming back from my dad's place in Myersdale. It's mostly curves and pines and not much else once you're north of town, but there's a turnout about 10 miles up that gives a nice view of the valley. I stopped there sometimes when I didn't feel like going home just yet. That night was quiet. Early April, a little chilly but clear. You could see your breath outside, and the moon was low and orange, kind of hiding behind some streaky clouds. I parked facing the edge, killed the engine, and rolled the window down. Didn't plan to stay long, just wanted to breathe some air that didn't smell like coffee or old cigarettes. There's no cell reception up there, which I've always liked. Just a narrow 2-lane road and the wind through trees. I was sitting there maybe 15 minutes, just watching the treetops shift in the breeze, when I caught headlights behind me in the mirror. I figured someone else was pulling in. The lights came around the bend slow, just the way you'd expect, bouncing a little from the uneven pavement. I watched them move up the road, steady and normal. It's a short stretch, about 100 yards from the bend to the turnout, and I waited for them to appear behind me, maybe park alongside. But they didn't. The lights kept shining, getting closer, but the car never came around the curve. They just hovered there, like the vehicle was stuck just out of sight. I craned my neck and looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the glow, still angled like it was mid-turn, low and golden like any pair of halogens. I thought maybe the driver had stopped in the lane. I turned off the interior light and sat still, figuring I'd wait until they passed or pulled in. But after another minute or so, the lights started to dim. Not flicker, dim, like someone was turning a dial down slowly. They faded until they were gone completely, and the bend behind me was just dark again. I waited. No sound. No engine, no gravel crunching, nothing. I got out of the truck and walked toward the back, figuring I'd hear something once I stepped out. But it was dead quiet except for the wind in the trees. I stood there a while, listening. Didn't even hear any birds. Eventually, I got back in and shut the door. Locked it too. Not sure why. I didn't feel scared exactly, just wired. Like my body had picked up on something my brain hadn't caught yet. After maybe 5 minutes, I turned the truck back on and kept driving north. I didn't see another car the whole rest of the way home. A few days later, I drove back out during the day just to see the spot again. I kept thinking maybe I'd find some fresh tire marks or something out of place, but it looked exactly the same. The road was dry, the turnout was empty, nothing unusual. I mentioned it to my brother, Cal, just casually while we were working on his fence. He said it was probably someone playing around with a spotlight or hiding off the side, but the road's narrow and there's no shoulder. No way to pull off without ending up in the brush. And even if someone wanted to prank a random driver at a turnout at night, why do it silently and then vanish? I stopped going out there after dark for a while. Took the longer route home through Johnstown instead. I don't really believe in anything weird, not like that, but I also can't explain why I never heard a car or saw it pass. Whatever it was, those lights looked real, but there was no car. I camp alone sometimes. Not for the thrill or some big spiritual thing, I just like the quiet. I've been doing it since I was 22, and I'm 34 now. I bring a little propane stove, some cheap wine, and my dog, Isco. He's a scruffy mutt, something between a terrier and maybe a collie, with big ears and no sense of direction. This happened last October, up in the Blue Ridge, near a little spot called Bear Hollow. It's not an official campground, just a clearing off an old service trail about 2 miles in. I've been going there every fall for years. Nobody ever bothers me, and it's just remote enough to feel like I'm somewhere. It was colder than usual that weekend. Not freezing, but in the low 40s at night, and the fog came in early. I got there late afternoon, set up the tent, and took Isco down to the stream to let him splash around. It was just me and him. No cars at the trailhead, no hikers coming out. I didn't even see any deer that day. After dinner, instant rice and a can of black beans, I got in the tent with my book and a lantern. Isco curled up in the corner near my boots. It was quiet, but not unnaturally so. I could hear the stream down below and some owls farther out. Regular night sounds. Around 10, I started hearing what sounded like voices. Not close, just little wisps, like people talking far off. Not yelling, not singing, just low, steady conversation, way out in the trees. I thought maybe it was sound carrying weird through the hills. There are a couple cabins down near the highway, probably half a mile as the crow flies. It wasn't enough to spook me, just enough to make me stop reading and listen. Isco perked up too. His ears were twitching and he kept looking at the wall of the tent like he was waiting for something to happen. But he didn't growl or bark, just sat there, stiff. I got out for a minute, thinking I might be able to catch the source of it. The fog had thickened by then. Everything looked kind of washed out, like the trees had been smudged. I couldn't see past my own flashlight, and it was cold enough that I didn't want to wander far. The voices, or whatever it was, stopped when I stepped out. I stood there for a while, just listening to nothing, then went back inside. Isco didn't move until I zipped the door. I figured if it came back, I'd record it. Not because I thought it was anything weird. I just like figuring things out. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and set it next to my sleeping bag. Around 1:30, I woke up again. Same thing, that strange murmuring. Still far away, still no real words. Just that same rhythmic rise and fall, like a group of people walking in a circle and talking low. This time, Isco was whimpering. He had his head between his paws and his tail tucked under him. I tried whispering to him, but he wouldn't look at me. I didn't get out this time. I just stayed zipped up, still, and let the phone record for a while. By maybe 2, it was gone. Isco calmed down, and I fell asleep again sometime after that. The next morning was bright and cold. I made coffee and walked Isco down to the stream. We were out there about half an hour. He seemed back to normal. It wasn't until I got home the next day that I listened to the recording. I was expecting faint voices, maybe wind through the trees. Instead, the entire file, about 35 minutes long, was just one sound, a low, steady hum. Kind of like when you accidentally record with your finger over the mic, but deeper. Almost too deep to be sound. It made my stomach turn as soon as I hit play. I don't know how to describe it, not just the tone, but the way it felt. It made my throat tighten and my skin prickle like I was about to throw up or cry. I didn't even make it through a full minute. I played it again with headphones. Same reaction, but worse. It felt like it was pressing on my chest, like something was behind me even though I was alone in my kitchen. I ripped the headphones off and sat on the floor until the feeling passed. I thought maybe the file was corrupted or my phone had picked up some weird interference. But when I imported it to my laptop and looked at the waveform, it wasn't flat. It had shape. Subtle variation, like breathing patterns or speech, but buried way down low. I emailed it to my brother, Nolan, who messes with audio stuff for a podcast. Didn't tell him what it was, just said, "Hey, can you check this out? It's giving me a weird reaction." He texted me 10 minutes later, just said, "What is this?" My speakers buzzed and crashed my audio driver. I didn't know what to tell him. I deleted the file the same night. Not because I was scared it was something, just because I couldn't stand the sound. Even thinking about it made me lightheaded. I went back out to Bear Hollow in January with a couple friends. No fog, no voices, nothing strange. But I didn't bring Isco that time, and I didn't sleep well. Every little sound outside made me grip my sleeping bag like a lifeline. I haven't camped alone since. I started noticing it last September. I'd just gotten this new telescope. Nothing crazy, just a Celestron Nexstar 6 SE I bought off a guy on Craigslist, and I'd set it up on the back deck to mess around with Jupiter and Saturn. I'm not serious into astronomy, but I've always liked looking up when the sky's clear, and I live out on the edge of town, so there's not too much light pollution, just farm fields and some woods. Anyway, the first night I saw it, I thought it was a plane. It was sitting low in the eastern sky, just above the treetops, and it had this soft, steady glow. Not blinking like most planes, not moving like a satellite, just sitting there. I wouldn't have paid much attention, except after about a minute, it started to move, but not across the sky like a plane or a satellite. It moved in these perfect little loops, like a corkscrew, tight spirals, but slow, smooth. You had to stare at it for a few seconds to even realize it was moving. I kept my eye on it, half expecting it to speed off or blink out, but it just kept spiraling. I checked the telescope, tried to track it manually, but it was subtle enough that the auto tracking didn't register it. I ended up just watching it with binoculars. It went on for exactly 13 minutes. I didn't time it on purpose at first. It was just a coincidence. I glanced at my phone when it started and again when it stopped. But I remember thinking that was weird. The moment it stopped, the light blinked out. Not dimmed, not faded. Just gone. No clouds, no haze, clear sky. It didn't duck behind anything. It just disappeared. I figured maybe it was a drone. There's a guy a few blocks over who flies those racing ones, so I figured maybe he got fancy with some LED setup. But it was so high. Higher than any drone I'd ever seen, and no sound. Even the quiet ones still buzz a little when they're close enough to see that clearly. Next night, I looked again. Same spot, same time. Nothing for a while, and I figured maybe it was just some random thing. But at exactly 9:42 p.m., this was September 11th, I saw the glow come back. Same spiral, same speed. That's when I started taking notes. I'm not the kind of guy who journals or anything, but I pulled out a pad and started writing down the time it appeared, how long it stayed visible, what direction it moved. Always the same, 9:42 p.m. to 9:55 p.m. Eastern sky, tiny loops clockwise, never wobbled, never drifted, just steady spiral until it shut off like a light switch. After the fifth night, I stopped bringing the telescope out. It didn't help anyway. I'd just sit out with binoculars, a notebook, and my dog, Nora. She's a terrier mix, kind of neurotic, always barking at stuff that's not there. But during those 13 minutes, she'd get weirdly still. Not tense, just quiet, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. A week or two in, I tried filming it with my phone. Didn't work. The light was too dim to show up unless you were watching with your own eyes. I even set up my old DSLR on a tripod, tried to get a long exposure. Still nothing. It was like the light just didn't register. But I could see it. I could track it with binoculars. I could even describe the way it moved, like a pen drawing loops in slow motion across black paper. One night I brought my buddy Clay over. He's more skeptical than I am, but he likes that kind of stuff. I didn't tell him what we were looking for, just told him to keep an eye on the eastern sky around 9:40. I wanted to see if he noticed it on his own. At 9:42, it popped in, same as always. He saw it right away. "What's that?" he asked. I said, "Just watch." We sat in lawn chairs and stared while Nora lay at our feet, dead still. He leaned forward after a few minutes. "Is it moving?" "Yeah." He watched for a while without saying anything. At 9:55, it blinked out. He turned to me and said, "That's not a drone." I said, "Nope." He asked me if I'd tried calling anyone, local airport, weather station, anything like that. I hadn't. I don't know what I thought they'd say. "Yeah, that's just our 13-minute corkscrew light test." I did email a local astronomy club to ask if anyone else had noticed it. Never heard back. Then the pattern broke. On October 4th, the light didn't show up. I sat outside for an hour, just waiting, but the sky stayed empty. The next night, same thing. I kept going out, checking my watch, looking in the same spot. Nothing. Nora was back to barking at bugs and chasing shadows like usual. On October 7th, I was inside doing dishes when the power flickered. Just once. Quick off. Quick on. Nothing unusual out here. But when it happened, Nora ran to the back door and started whining. Not barking. Whining. I looked out the window. The light was back, but it wasn't in the eastern sky this time. It was almost directly overhead. Still that same soft glow, but brighter. Bigger. And it wasn't spiraling anymore. It was just hovering. I opened the door and stepped out, and it felt like the air had changed. Not colder exactly, but heavy, like the air after a thunderstorm. My skin prickled. Nora wouldn't follow me outside. She stayed pressed against the doorframe, whining. I looked up. The light didn't move. I stood there watching it for maybe a minute, then it started drifting south. Not fast, but steady. No spiral, no pulsing, just a straight line like it had gotten tired of its usual dance. I watched until it disappeared over the trees. It didn't blink out this time, just slid away. It never came back. I've been out every clear night since then, just in case. Same chair, same binoculars, same spot in the sky. Sometimes Nora sits with me, sometimes not. I've stared at that empty patch of sky so long I've memorized every star around it. But that moving light, the spiral, the 13-minute routine, nothing. It's like whatever it was finished whatever it was doing, or it got bored, or it left. I don't know. All I know is for 23 nights in a row, that thing showed up like clockwork. Spirals, silence, gone. Then it changed, then it left, and now the sky's back to normal. Mostly. I was hiking with two friends, Jenna and Marco, up near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho. It was early October, and the weather was crisp but clear, the kind of perfect fall day you don't want to waste inside. We'd been planning this trip for months, 3 days out on the trail, just us and the wilderness. We set out early in the morning from a trailhead near Stanley, taking the Alpine Lake route. The path wasn't crowded, maybe a few groups scattered here and there, but mostly it was just us. Jenna and Marco are both experienced hikers, so I wasn't worried about anything. The usual backpacks loaded, plenty of water, snacks, a basic first aid kit. That first day was uneventful. We made good time, chatting, taking breaks by streams, snapping pictures of the orange and red leaves. The kind of trip where you feel far away from everything. At night, we camped near a small clearing at about 7,000 feet elevation. We sat around the fire, talking until the stars came out. Nothing weird at all. The next morning was when things got strange. We woke up to fog rolling through the valley, thick enough to turn the forest into something out of a dream. Everything was quiet except for the occasional bird call and the faint rustle of leaves. We packed up and headed deeper into the trail. About 2 hours in, while crossing a slight incline near an old rock slide, Marco stopped. He pointed down near the roots of a twisted pine and called us over. There, half buried in the dirt and fallen leaves, was this object. It looked metallic, but not like anything you'd expect to find in the woods. Smooth, with no seams, no markings, not a scratch or dent. At first, I thought it was some kind of weird boulder, maybe quartz or something shiny, but it definitely wasn't rock. It was a dark, gunmetal gray, almost reflective, but not enough to catch the fog light. The shape was roughly an oval flattened on one side, about the size of a football. I knelt down and brushed dirt off it, and it felt cold, unnaturally cold. Jenna pulled out her gloves and reached to touch it. The moment her fingers grazed the surface, a low humming started. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration you could feel in your bones. We all froze. "What the hell?" Jenna whispered. The humming didn't stop, but then the strangest thing happened. Our GPS units, each of us had one, started glitching. The screens flickered, showing random coordinates, switching maps, then going blank. Marco's phone, which was in airplane mode but with GPS on, did the same thing. No signal, no reception, nothing. I tried to pull my GPS away from the object, but the signal just got worse the closer I brought it. Stepping back a few feet, the devices started coming back online, though still wonky. Jenna suggested we move on, but Marco was stuck staring at the thing. The fog had thickened even more now. It was almost like the trees closed in around us. The humming seemed louder, but it wasn't coming from any one spot. It was like the air itself vibrated. We talked about calling it in to the ranger station, but realized none of us had any kind of cell service, which wasn't unusual out there, but felt more isolating now. No one had a radio, and the trail was too remote for much else. I wanted to keep moving, but Marco was hesitant. He reached out to touch the object again, and the humming went sharp like a tone you'd hear in your ear if a speaker's too close. His hand jerked back fast. "It's messing with my head," he said quietly. We decided to mark the spot with some flagging tape Jenna had in her pack, and took a few photos with our phones, though the images came out oddly grainy, almost like static covered the edges. When I looked at mine later, the pictures of the object seemed to shimmer slightly, like a heat haze. As we moved away, the GPS units slowly started working again, but the trail felt different. The fog stayed thick, almost too thick for the time of day, and the forest was quiet, unnervingly quiet. No birds, no animals, nothing but the crunch of our boots on the dead leaves. We tried to shake off the weird feeling, focusing on getting to the next campsite, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. It felt like something was watching us. That night at camp, Jenna swore she heard a faint tapping outside her tent. I went out to check, but there was nothing there, just the trees swaying in the wind. Still, none of us slept well. The last day, we took a different route back, circling away from the spot with the object. We didn't mention it much, almost like agreeing not to talk about it would make it less real. Back at the trailhead, my GPS logged an extra hour during the hike. We all checked the timestamps. There was definitely a gap where the devices malfunctioned, but none of us could remember stopping that long or waiting around. We looked at each other, uneasy, but no one said anything. I still have those photos saved. Every once in a while, I pull them up and watch the shimmer on the object's surface. It's like it's not fully there, or maybe not fully part of this place. The weirdest part is, I can't explain what it was or why it was there. None of us can. It's not something you expect to find hiking in the woods, and yet it was there, humming and glitching out our gear, surrounded by that fog. I don't know what it meant or if anyone else has seen something like it, but it's something I can't shake. I guess some things just don't have answers. I was out walking my dog, an old border collie named Clover, one chilly October night in my neighborhood on the edge of Portland. It had been raining all day, and the streets were slick and shiny under the streetlights. The air was damp and smelled like wet leaves and pine. Clover and I usually took the same loop every night, a couple miles through quiet streets, past some older houses with yards full of untrimmed bushes, then a stretch of forest trail at the end. That night, everything felt normal at first. Clover was tugging on the leash, sniffing every lamppost and patch of grass like usual. I was half listening to a podcast, half lost in thought. It was close to 9 p.m. and there wasn't much traffic, just a few cars now and then. Then, near the entrance to the forest trail, Clover suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. She stiffened up like someone hit the pause button, ears pricked, tail low but stiff. I called her name softly, but she didn't move. She was staring straight up into the sky, eyes wide and fixed on something I couldn't see at first. I looked up, scanning the dark sky behind the thick canopy of tall pines. It was mostly cloudy, but there was this one weird patch where the clouds parted, showing a pale gray circle of light. Not like the moon, too dull and too round, almost like a dim spotlight hanging there. It didn't blink or change shape, but it didn't look natural. Clover wouldn't budge. I tugged gently on the leash, but she was rooted. I crouched down and tried to call her again. Still nothing. Her breathing had slowed, and her whole body was tense, like she was watching something she couldn't take her eyes off. I started to feel this creeping unease. It was one of those moments where something about the air changes, but you can't put your finger on why. The forest was so quiet you could hear the wet leaves settling on the ground. No bugs, no wind, no distant traffic, just this weird silence. After a minute or two of this, I finally pulled Clover back toward the street, dragging her half-limp body with me. She didn't resist, but didn't want to walk on her own either. Her eyes stayed fixed upward the entire time. When we got back into the neighborhood, she started acting more normal again, sniffing the ground, looking around like nothing happened. But I kept glancing up at that spot in the sky. The pale light was still there, just hanging, steady and unblinking. On the way home, I noticed that the streetlights near the forest edge were flickering a bit, like their bulbs were about to go out. I assumed it was just the weather or a power glitch, but the timing felt off. I'd never seen all of them flicker like that before. When I got inside, Clover immediately jumped on the couch and curled up like nothing had happened. I checked the clock. It was exactly 9:13 p.m. I spent the rest of the night half watching the windows, half listening for sounds outside, but nothing came. No cars, no footsteps, no animal noises, just the occasional drip of water from the gutters. The next morning, I told a few neighbors about it, figuring maybe someone else had noticed something weird in the sky. Nobody had. Some said they'd heard a plane fly over earlier, but nothing unusual. I tried to look up weather reports, atmospheric conditions, anything that might explain that strange light. Nothing. Over the next few days, Clover kept acting strange whenever we walked near that part of the trail. She'd stop and stare up, ears forward, stiffen like before. No barking, no growling, just this frozen attention on that one spot. One afternoon, I went back alone to the trail during daylight to see if I could spot anything. The patch of forest was quiet but unremarkable. No signs, no weird markings, no ground disturbances. I set my phone to record video and tried to get a clip of the spot in the sky where Clover had been staring. But in the daylight, there was nothing unusual at all, just a break in the clouds, the usual pale gray. Later that week, I found that my phone's clock and a few apps were slightly off by a couple of minutes, but only during certain times, mostly late evening. At first, I thought it was just a glitch or low signal, but it kept happening every night around 9 p.m. That's when I started feeling like something was watching us. Not just Clover, but me too. Nothing visible, just this presence. Every time I was outside at night near that trail, I'd get this feeling like I was being followed, but when I looked back, there was never anyone there. One evening, after a long day at work, I went out for a quick walk with Clover around 8:45 p.m. The clouds were thick and the rain had started again, light and steady. We reached the trail entrance and right on schedule, Clover froze again. This time, when I looked up, the light was gone. But the forest felt different. The wind had picked up, rustling the pine needles loudly, and the silence was broken by this faint low hum, almost electronic, but distant and pulsing. I pulled Clover toward home as quickly as I could. She was trembling slightly, which I hadn't seen before. When we got inside, I closed all the windows and doors, sat down with her, and tried to shake off the weird feeling. I checked the clock. It read 9:02 p.m. The time was off again. I don't know what we saw that night or what Clover sensed, but it's been with me ever since. I stopped taking that trail after dark. Clover still doesn't like that part of the neighborhood, and sometimes I swear she's watching something invisible, just waiting. Nothing about it makes sense, and I'm not sure I want it to, but I keep thinking about that pale light frozen in the sky and the way everything just paused for a moment, like something was there but only just out of reach. I don't usually bring my camera camping. I'm not exactly a nature photographer or anything like that, but last summer I decided to try it out for fun. I was up near the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, alone except for my dog, a black lab named Rigsby. We had this small clearing by a lake, surrounded by thick pine and spruce. It was late July, and the nights were warm but still crisp enough that you wanted a jacket by midnight. I'd set up my tent and spent the afternoon hiking a couple miles down a trail that curls around the lake. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual birds, bugs, and the occasional splash from fish. When I got back, I unpacked my camera and tripod, figuring I'd try some night shots of the stars since the sky there is so clear. Around 10:30, I settled by the shore, set up the tripod, and started snapping some long exposures. I was just playing around, trying to capture the Milky Way, maybe some star trails. Rigsby lay curled up nearby, occasionally flicking his ears at some distant animal sounds. I remember checking the screen between shots, satisfied that the camera was picking up the stars crisp and clear. The lake was calm, and the only light was from the stars and a faint orange glow on the horizon where the sun had just dipped below the trees. I was about to pack up when I noticed something odd. I'd taken a long exposure shot for maybe 30 seconds or so, then checked it. The stars looked right, but there was this series of tiny lights moving in a zigzag pattern across the frame, like a string of dots forming a sort of sideways W, then dipping down, then back up again. It didn't match any star trails or planes. I looked up. The sky was empty. No blinking lights, no aircraft, nothing moving at all. I shrugged and figured maybe it was some kind of reflection or insect close to the lens. So I took another shot, this time for 45 seconds. The same pattern appeared again, almost identical. Those small, sharp points of light weaving in that same zigzag path across the dark sky. I called out to Rigsby, "You seeing this, boy?" He lifted his head, ears twitching, but didn't move. He seemed calm. I took another shot, just to be sure, then sat back and stared at the screen. The more I looked, the more unsettled I felt. The lights were perfectly spaced, almost like they were following a deliberate path, but nothing I could see in real life was moving that way. I kept the camera on the tripod and set it for a 2-minute exposure. I sat on a log and waited, watching the sky. It was so quiet, only the soft rustling of the trees and Rigsby's breathing beside me. When the shot finished, I checked it on the screen. The same zigzag pattern was there. Longer now, stretched across the frame. Nothing like a plane or satellite path I'd ever seen. No blinking red or white lights, no steady beam. That's when I noticed the feeling in the air had shifted. The usual summer night sounds were muted. No frogs, no insects, nothing. It was like the forest had gone completely still. I stood up slowly, scanning the tree line. The shadows seemed thicker, darker, and the sky seemed quieter than before. Rigsby stood with me, ears forward, body tense. I started packing up my gear, but just as I was about to zip up the camera bag, I caught a glimpse of something low in the trees. It wasn't a figure or an animal, just a faint glow, pale, bluish, flickering. I squinted, but it disappeared as soon as I blinked. I told myself it was just a flashlight, or maybe the neighbor camper's fire reflecting, but the campsite was deserted around me. I didn't sleep much that night. Rigsby stayed close, growling softly once or twice at something I couldn't see. The next morning, I looked over the shots again on my laptop. The zigzag lights were unmistakable. They weren't random or natural, but I still had no clue what they were or why I hadn't seen a thing with my eyes. I showed a few photos to a friend who's into astronomy. He said maybe satellites or drones, but the pattern didn't fit any known flight paths. He suggested it could be some kind of light distortion or maybe bugs catching the lens's reflection, but that didn't explain why the pattern was so precise or why the forest had gone dead silent during the long exposures. I've gone back to that spot a few times since, camera in tow, hoping to catch the lights again. Nothing. The nights are normal, full of stars and the usual sounds. No zigzag lights, no strange silence. I don't know if it was something out there or just a trick of the camera and my tired brain, but looking back, that night felt different. Like something unseen was moving just beyond what my eyes could catch, weaving quietly through the sky. I was flying alone that afternoon, heading back from a quick survey job over the Arizona desert. The sky was clear, dry heat shimmering off the rocks below, and the small Cessna hummed steadily beneath me. I like flying these routes. Quiet, no air traffic to worry about, just me and the vast empty lands stretching out forever. My co-pilot that day was my old beagle, Ollie. He usually stayed calm in the cockpit, curled up on the floor, but that day he was restless, ears twitching every time the plane rattled from a minor gust. We'd climbed to about 7,500 feet when I noticed something odd in the distance, just below me. At first I thought it was another plane, but the shape didn't look right. It was definitely an aircraft, sleek, rounded edges, but it was flying upside down, which is unusual but not unheard of for military or stunt pilots. Only problem, there was no visible engine noise, no contrails, no propeller blur, nothing. It moved silently and smooth, almost like it was gliding without effort. And it didn't have the usual control surfaces you'd expect, like rudders or flaps, just a smooth, solid shape. I figured maybe it was a military drone or some kind of test craft, but I'm civilian, and I wasn't expecting any flights in this area. Plus, the craft was flying underneath me at a lower altitude, but perfectly matched to my speed. I adjusted my heading slightly to get a better look, but the moment I did, it banked slowly and matched my course exactly, still inverted. Ollie growled softly, low in his throat, something he almost never does. The whole thing felt off, like the laws of physics I know didn't apply. No engine noise, no heat distortion from an exhaust, no blinking lights, no navigation signals. The desert below looked the same, flat, endless, nothing out of place. But the craft's presence was just there. I radioed flight control, thinking maybe they'd picked up something or could identify the object, but no one responded. Probably outside of controlled airspace. I tried my phone, but the signal was spotty and it dropped. After a few minutes of flying side by side, the aircraft slowly began to rise, still upside down, and then about 500 feet below me, it just vanished. Like someone turned off a light. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. No contrail, no vapor trail, no sudden change in weather or anything that could explain it. I checked my instruments, everything normal. The altimeter, airspeed, engine gauges, no disturbance. Ollie had stopped growling but was alert, staring at the empty space where the craft had been. I shook my head, thinking I must be imagining things. Heat mirages are common over the desert, but this was too defined, too real. The rest of the flight was uneventful, but I kept glancing back, half expecting the shape to reappear. It didn't. When I landed, I mentioned it to the FBO mechanic, a guy named Earl who's seen a lot of odd stuff on the tarmac over the years. Earl raised his eyebrows and said, "You sure you weren't seeing things? Desert heat plays tricks on everyone." I told him about the lack of noise and the smooth, silent flight. He just shrugged and said, "Sounds like you met a ghost pilot." I didn't tell Claire, my wife, until the next day. She listened quietly and asked if I was feeling okay. I was just confused and unsettled. Ollie wouldn't stop pacing, which was new. I haven't seen anything like it since. Sometimes when I fly alone, I look for that smooth, silent craft below me, but it never shows again. I spent the better part of my life staring at radar screens, guiding planes through controlled chaos, making sure nobody ended up in a pileup thousands of feet in the air. Retired now, living quiet in a small town in northern Idaho. Fishing, reading, fixing the occasional leak around the house, that kind of thing. Nothing fancy. But there's this one night that keeps circling in my head, even though I promised myself I'd just forget it. It was late November, about 3 years ago. The kind of cold night where the sky is so clear it almost hurts to look up. I was still consulting part-time for a regional control center, just monitoring a few flights from home on my radar setup. Nothing too busy, mostly cargo and small private planes. Around 11 p.m., I noticed a tiny blip on my screen way up high, much higher than usual. It was sitting at roughly 80,000 feet. I double-checked the altitude because it didn't make sense. Commercial jets rarely cruise above 45,000 or 50,000 feet, and 80,000 feet, that's almost twice that. That's near space. Military or spy planes sometimes get close, but nothing civilian and nothing I was aware of scheduled that night. I kept watching it, trying to figure out what it was. It hovered there, just a single dot, not moving. For about 30 seconds, it stayed put. No blinking, no transponder code, nothing, like it was ignoring all the usual radar protocols. Then, in one heartbeat, well, more like 1 second, the blip dropped straight down, from 80,000 feet to about 200 feet above the ground. I swear it looked like someone hit fast forward. I blinked and double-checked the data. No glitch, no system error. The machine wasn't lying. The dot was now low, almost hovering near ground level, right above a stretch of dense forest about 40 miles northeast of Spokane. The speed it covered was impossible for anything I knew, even top-secret military tech. I radioed the regional supervisor, hoping maybe someone else had eyes on it, maybe radar confirmation from another station. Static. No response. Tried again. Nothing. That was odd. I tapped into flight data from nearby airports, just to see if any planes had reported unusual sightings or if any control centers picked up strange radar contacts. Nothing came up. Then, just like it appeared, the blip vanished. No gradual fade out, just gone. I sat there for a minute, staring at the blank spot on the screen. The entire sequence had taken about 90 seconds from start to finish. My mind raced, but I kept trying to stick to facts. Maybe a radar ghost, maybe some software hiccup, but the system was old but reliable, and I knew its quirks well enough. The next morning, I called the regional center to file a report. I explained what I saw and asked if they had any record of it. The guy on the other end was polite but firm. He said, "No official record and you're not to file anything about that. It's best left off the books." I asked why. No answer. Just, "It's for your own good." I found that strange. This was the same agency I'd worked for decades. Usually they're all about documentation, especially something that bizarre. And I'm not the type to stir up trouble, so that made me pause. I pressed a little, asking if this was some kind of classified exercise, maybe a test flight. The line went silent for a moment. Then the guy said, "You saw what you saw. Just keep it quiet." After that, I didn't get any more calls or follow-ups. The radar software didn't show any updates or corrections. No official word ever came out about unidentified objects that night. It wasn't just the blip's impossible drop that got to me. It was the way the whole thing felt wrong from the moment I saw it, like a puzzle piece that didn't belong. In the days after, I found myself double-checking my own systems, running diagnostics. Nothing was wrong, no glitches, the equipment was working perfectly. But the strangest part? For the next 2 weeks, I caught myself glancing up at the sky more than usual, especially at night. It felt like something was watching back. Not hostile, but patient. One night, about 10 days later, I was out on my porch with my dog, a scrappy mutt named Hobbs, when I noticed a strange, steady light far off to the northeast. It wasn't blinking like a plane, didn't move like a helicopter, and wasn't the bright, steady glow of a distant town. Just a pale, white orb hanging motionless against the stars. Hobbs growled low and pulled at his leash, but I convinced him to stay. The light stayed for a good 15 minutes, then vanished without a trace. I chalked it up to a satellite or maybe a weather balloon, but deep down, I knew that was different. Since then, I keep the radar on at night, scanning for anything odd. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see something that shouldn't be there. I've told a few friends in the trade, but none have seen anything like it. And I don't blame them for thinking I'm nuts. But I'm telling you now, there was something on that screen that night. Something that dropped from the edge of space to treetop level in a blink, then disappeared without a trace, and no one wants it talked about. I saw it from the dock behind my cabin. This was 2 summers ago. I'd been retired about 4 years at that point, commercial pilot, mostly domestic routes out of Denver, flew for 38 years, no incidents. I know the sky, I know what moves how, what lights belong to what. You get it burned into you after that long. My place is up in the Adirondacks on a little private lake about 45 minutes east of Old Forge. I split time between there and my daughter's place in Albany. But in the summers I stay out here as much as I can. It's quiet. Just loons, trees, and water. That night, mid-July, I was out back around 10:30 with a glass of bourbon watching the sky. No moon, no clouds, just stars on full blast. I'd brought out the dog, Jasper. He's a husky mix, old as hell now. He was sniffing around the edge of the dock, not doing much. I wasn't looking for anything unusual. It was just a windless, clear night, warm but not muggy. Typical. Then I noticed something weird about the stars. A spot overhead, just left of Orion, looked wrong. Not moving, not blinking, just a blank patch. I thought maybe it was a cloud I'd missed, but there weren't any. I stood up, walked to the edge of the dock, and really looked at it. It was a shape, not a spot, not round, more like a stretched oval, sort of crooked on one end. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were staring right at it, because it didn't have lights or edges. It was just darker than the sky. It blocked stars, though. That's what got me. I could see a small cluster of stars near Orion, but every time I traced over them, they'd vanish inside that shape. Not dimmed, gone. Like something was between me and them. No sound, no trail, no reflection. Just this big, dark mass, slow moving. Jasper noticed it a minute after I did. He stopped sniffing and stared straight up, ears flat. Then he whined. Not loud, but sharp. He doesn't usually whine unless he's in pain or scared. I knelt next to him and kept looking. The thing was still drifting, maybe northeast, but too slow for any aircraft I've ever seen. Way too smooth. If it were a plane, I'd have heard something, even at altitude, even if it was gliding. If it were a weather balloon, it would have had some drift, a wobble, something. This didn't wobble. It held shape, moved like it was being pulled by something invisible. I went inside and got my binoculars. Not the best ones, just a mid-range Nikon pair I use for birds. When I looked through them, I couldn't focus on the shape itself. It was like my eyes kept sliding off it. I could see stars around it clear as day, but as soon as I tried to focus on the mass, it blurred out. It wasn't my eyes. I tried cleaning the lenses. Same result. I watched it for maybe 5 minutes. Jasper paced the dock the whole time, tail tucked, never barking. Then, just like that, the shape wasn't there anymore. I don't mean it sped off. I mean it was just gone. 1 second I was tracking it against Cassiopeia, and the next I was staring at the full sky. Stars that had been blocked were back. No delay. No wind. No noise. Nothing. I figured maybe I'd had one too many drinks, so I walked inside and poured some coffee. Sat in the living room for an hour, waiting to feel dumb, but I didn't. I couldn't shake that feeling, like something had been above me, not just high in the sky. Closer. I tried telling a buddy of mine, Scott, who flew KC-10s back in the day. He's one of the few people I figured might take me seriously. He didn't laugh, but he did that thing where he rubbed his chin and said, "Weird," a lot. Then he changed the subject. Next night, same time, I went back out there with a lawn chair, a notebook, and Jasper. We waited. Nothing. Clear sky, stars everywhere, no black spots. But around 11, Jasper started acting strange again. He stood up real stiff, stared at the tree line behind us, not the sky this time, and gave a low growl. There's nothing behind the cabin but forest. I stood up and looked too. Couldn't see anything. No wind, no animals, not even crickets. Just silence. Jasper stayed rigid for maybe 30 seconds, then sat down hard like someone pressed down on him. He didn't move for the rest of the night. I stayed out until almost 1. No shape came back. About a week later, I mentioned it to the guy who runs the hardware store in town. He lives on the other side of the lake. I didn't say what I saw, just asked if he'd noticed anything strange in the sky lately. He hesitated a little too long before saying no. Then he asked if I'd had power blips that week. I said no, everything was fine. He said his place flickered out for about 30 seconds Tuesday night. Lights, fridge, even his watch reset. Same night I saw the shape. Jasper won't go near the dock after dark now, not even for a treat. I tried to coax him down there a few nights later, and he stopped halfway, looked up, and backed off. I've seen weather balloons, satellites, stealth bombers, all of it. I've flown over 3 continents and landed in all kinds of conditions. I've never seen anything move like that thing did. Or not move, I guess. Whatever it wasn't flying in any way I've seen before. It was just there, moving without moving, blocking the sky like a thumb over your eye. And then it wasn't. We set up camp just after dusk in this little clearing about 2 miles off the main trail. It was me and 3 friends, Mike, Jen, and Dave, just a quick weekend getaway to get away from the city noise. Nothing fancy. We picked this spot because it was open enough to pitch the tents, but surrounded by thick woods, so we figured we'd get some privacy. The first few hours were normal. We built a fire, grilled some burgers, drank a couple of beers. It was cool out, early fall, crisp air, the usual crackling fire sounds, some crickets in the background. We told stories, laughed a bit, then started to wind down around 10:30. I was the last one to crawl into my sleeping bag inside my tent. The others had theirs set up nearby, just a few yards apart. The forest was quiet, dark except for the fire's fading glow and a sliver of moonlight. I was just drifting off when I noticed something strange. There was this clicking sound, like someone tapping their fingernails on a glass bottle, only more deliberate, rhythmic. It was soft but clear enough to cut through the quiet. At first, I thought maybe one of the guys was messing around or some kind of insect, but the pattern was too steady, like a slow metronome ticking in the dark. I pulled back the tent flap a bit and shone my flashlight outside. The fire was dead by now, just embers glowing. I didn't see anyone. The woods were still. No animals, no movement. I woke Mike up and asked if he heard it. He was quiet for a minute, then nodded. Jen and Dave were awake too, all of us suddenly alert. We all stepped outside, flashlights sweeping the tree line. The noise stopped as soon as we moved, like it vanished into the night. We looked around for anything. A woodpecker maybe, or some kind of critter, but nothing. Just trees and shadows. Probably just some weird animal, Mike said, but none of us sounded convinced. We went back inside the tents, doors zipped up tight. 10 minutes later, the clicking started again. Same pattern, same slow rhythm. Except this time it sounded like it was moving, circling the tents. Around and around, slow and steady. I swear, you could almost track it if you tried. Like it was walking a path just beyond the tree line, keeping pace. Every now and then it paused, then picked up again. We all stayed silent, listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it was close enough to be unsettling. Not right next to the tent, but near enough to make you wonder if something was watching. After maybe 15 minutes, Jen said, "I'm going outside to check." Nobody stopped her. She unzipped her tent and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The clicking stopped immediately. "Nothing here," she said, voice low, shining her light into the woods. No animals, no movement. We stayed out there for a few more minutes, walking a small circle around the campsite. It was dead silent except for the rustle of leaves underfoot. Finally, we went back in. The tents zipped up. We kept talking softly for a bit, trying to shake off the weird feeling. Then it stopped. For the next hour, nothing. No sounds, no movement. We relaxed, thought maybe it was just a one-off thing, some animal wandering by or a weird echo. But then, right as we were drifting back to sleep, the clicking came back. Same rhythm, same slow circle. It was like the sound had a mind of its own, appearing only when it wanted. This time, it felt different, closer, more deliberate, like something was pacing us, but not stepping on twigs or leaves. Just that steady tapping, almost mechanical. We lay there frozen, listening. I could hear Dave's breathing quicken in the tent next to me. After a while, Mike whispered, "We should check again." I didn't want to, but I nodded. We all slipped out, flashlights on, scanning the trees. The clicking stopped again the second we moved. We searched for a while, but it was like chasing a ghost. No footprints, no animals, no signs of anything. Just that eerie silence. We got back inside and agreed to keep our phones close. None of us wanted to admit how weird it felt. Over the next hour, the clicking came and went a few more times, always stopping the moment we moved or turned on a light. At one point, I looked at my watch. I swear, an hour had passed, but the night felt heavier, slower, like time was dragging or stretching. By 4 a.m., the noise finally stopped for good. We didn't sleep much after that. Too alert, too on edge. In the morning, we packed up quickly. We didn't talk much about it, just agreed maybe it was some weird animal or the forest playing tricks. Back home, I kept thinking about that sound, how it moved around us but stayed just out of reach, how it stopped whenever we tried to find it. I still don't know what it was. None of us do. It wasn't a bird, not a woodpecker. It wasn't a person or another camper. Nothing left tracks or signs. Just that clicking, like something circling, watching, but never close enough to see. We were up at Crooked Hollow, this open patch of pasture behind Will's uncle's place, about 10 miles outside Lander. Nowhere special, just a big private field tucked between low hills and some scattered cottonwoods. Will's uncle lets us use it for stuff like this, bonfires, beers, whatever, so long as we don't leave trash or get loud. It was a dry night, early October, not too cold yet. Clear sky, no clouds, stars out in full. You could see the Milky Way like a brushstroke across the whole sky. I remember that part clearly. It was one of those nights where you feel small in a good way. It was me, Will, his girlfriend Maya, and my buddy Carter. We'd all driven up in Will's truck around 9, parked by the edge of the field, and laid out some sleeping bags and tarps to lie back on. Maya brought one of those little Bluetooth speakers, and we listened to music for a while. Low stuff, ambient, nothing distracting, just staring up, pointing out constellations when we could actually remember names. We weren't drunk or high or anything. I want to say that early on because people always assume that. We had a few beers, yeah, but nobody was buzzed. It was too quiet for that. Things started feeling weird around midnight. Not bad, just quiet in a way that didn't feel right. Like the air went still, no wind, no bugs. The trees didn't rustle, and there was this tension in the silence like the kind you get before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was totally clear. I sat up and noticed Carter was already looking around. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Will nodded, but didn't say anything. Maya was still lying back, eyes closed. She hadn't said much for a while. We all looked up again, and that's when we saw them. At first I thought it was just a satellite, one of those bright ones you catch gliding across the sky. But then a second one appeared. Then a third, all spaced perfectly, like they were connected by invisible lines. Then a fourth, and they started moving together. Not fast, just shifting. They weren't blinking, no red or green markers like a plane, just solid white lights, soft around the edges, and totally silent. They started rotating, that's the only word I can think of. The 4 lights moved in a square, then the square tilted like it was rolling over in the air. But it wasn't tumbling. Every move was smooth and perfectly controlled, like water moving in a pattern. The whole shape just turned itself inside out, like origami folding in the air, and became a triangle. Then a line. Carter whispered, "That's not drones." And he was right. Drones buzz. These didn't make a sound, not even wind displacement. And the way they moved together was too fluid. It wasn't like separate objects coordinating. It was like one thing with multiple points of light. Then more lights appeared. Fainter, farther back. 8 or 9 of them in a longer formation, like a kind of arc. They stayed low on the horizon for a minute before vanishing, not by flying away, but just by dimming out one by one, like someone pulling a dimmer switch. None of us said anything for a long time. Then Maya sat up. She looked around like she'd just woken up, confused and a little annoyed. She asked if we were leaving soon. Carter turned to her and said, "Did you not see that?" She just stared at him. "See what?" She hadn't seen the lights. She didn't know what time it was, thought it was still maybe 10:30. Said she'd just been relaxing with her eyes closed. We told her what happened and she thought we were messing with her. Wouldn't believe any of it. She wasn't even joking. She genuinely had no idea what we were talking about. Then Will checked the time on his phone and got quiet. It was 1:47 a.m. None of us could account for the last hour. We remembered seeing the first set of lights around midnight. The last thing I remembered before that was noticing how still the air felt. But after the triangle turned into a line, I don't know what we were doing. I don't remember sitting up or lying down or looking away. It was like something cut the reel and pasted it back together. Maya stood up and brushed off her jeans. She looked uneasy, like she didn't want to be out there anymore. Said she had a headache and needed to lie down in the truck. Will went with her. Carter and I stayed a little longer. We didn't say much. Just watched the sky, hoping something would come back. Nothing did. Eventually, we packed everything up and headed out. The drive back into town was dead quiet. I remember thinking it was odd that we didn't pass a single other car, even on the state road. Just empty blacktop and our headlights. When we dropped Carter off at his place, he leaned into the window and said, "That wasn't normal, man. I know what planes look like. I know what drones look like. That wasn't either." I nodded, and he looked relieved that I didn't argue. The next day, Maya still had no memory of any of it. Not just the lights. She didn't remember lying down for that long, or that weird stillness, or anything after maybe 11:30. We all hung out the following weekend and tried to talk about it again, but it felt like the more we tried to pin it down, the less sense it made. Will said he kept trying to remember how the lights disappeared. Not the distant ones that faded out, but the close ones that changed shape. He said it was like they turned into a single point and shrunk, not moved away, but folded into a dot that just wasn't there anymore. I tried drawing the formations later, and they never looked right. The movements were too smooth, too dimensional, like trying to sketch water folding itself into patterns. Carter doesn't like talking about it anymore. Says he keeps dreaming about that silence. That part right before we noticed the lights, when everything just stopped. He says in the dream it's longer. Like we were sitting in that silence for hours. I've gone back to Crooked Hollow once since then, by myself, just to sit and look. I didn't see anything weird, but the sky didn't feel the same. It felt blank, like something had already passed through, like whatever we saw wasn't coming back. I was hiking alone near the edge of the Markham Forest just as the sun started dipping below the tree line. It was late October and the air had that cold bite you get before winter really sets in. I like going out around dusk because the woods quiet down and feel different, calmer but somehow heavier, like everything's holding its breath. My dog, Scout, a lean border collie mix, was with me, trotting ahead, nose low to the ground as usual. I'd been following one of the lesser-used trails, one that snakes through an older part of the forest where the trees grow close together and the underbrush is thick. About an hour into the hike, just when the light was fading fast, Scout stopped and started barking at something near a large maple. I called him back, but he wouldn't budge. I figured he'd found some old animal carcass or maybe a piece of trash, but when I got close, I saw something strange. Sticking out of the tree trunk, maybe 5 feet off the ground, was this oval-shaped metal object. It was about the size of a football, but thinner, like a flattened oval, and it was embedded so deeply that it looked like it had grown there or been fused with the wood. The bark around it had grown tight and smooth against the edges, no gaps or cracks. I ran my hand over it expecting cold metal, but instead it felt warm. Not hot, just a steady, gentle warmth that didn't fade even though the air was chilly. There were no seams, no screws, no bolts, nothing that suggested it was some kind of device or machine. The surface was smooth, matte gray, almost like a dull steel, but with no markings or labels. It didn't reflect light much, even as the sun disappeared behind the hills. I stepped back, suddenly feeling uneasy. I'd never seen anything like it in the woods. Scout was still barking, low and tense, his hackles raised. I called him again, and this time he came without hesitation. I debated for a minute whether to take a photo, but my phone was dead, probably from the cold, so I pocketed the thought and pulled out my lighter to get a bit more light. The flame flickered weakly in the evening breeze, casting strange shadows on the tree and that metal shape. The warmth from the object didn't seem to react to the flame. It stayed constant, like it was powered from inside. The weird part was the silence. No humming, no ticking, no vibrations at all. Just this heavy, solid presence against the tree. I touched it again, and this time the warmth spread slightly through my fingertips, not burning, but oddly comforting. I knelt down to get a better look when Scout suddenly growled low in his throat. I looked up and saw nothing, but the hair on my neck stood up. It was like the forest had gone completely quiet. All the usual sounds, the rustling leaves, birds, even the distant creek, had just stopped. I got to my feet fast, trying to shake the feeling off. That's when I noticed the shadows shifting. Not the trees or the branches, but some darker shapes moving just beyond the rim of the fading light. Nothing concrete, more like the space itself was bending or folding, but it felt deliberate, like something was watching. I grabbed Scout's collar and started heading back toward the trailhead. As we moved, I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the shadows didn't follow. They just flickered in and out, disappearing when I looked directly. By the time we reached the main path, it was almost dark. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the warmth from the metal object was already fading in my mind, replaced by this nagging feeling of wrongness. The next morning, I went back to the spot with my phone fully charged, hoping to take pictures, or at least show someone. When I got there, the tree was just a tree. No metal object, no scars or marks in the bark, nothing unusual at all. The spot where I'd felt warmth was just cold wood. I asked around town, old-timers, park rangers, even the local historical society, but no one had ever heard of anything like that or reported anything strange in that part of the forest. The strangest part is that, since then, Scout won't go near that area. He gets tense, pulls hard on the leash, and whines if I try to lead him close. Me, I keep thinking about that warmth, the silence, and the shadows. I don't know what I saw or what that object was, but it's stuck with me. Every time I close my eyes, I get this feeling like something is just beyond sight, waiting, watching. I usually hike late at night when the trails are empty and the world feels quieter. It's just me, my pack, and my dog, Dusty, a lean black lab with a white patch on his chest that looks like a splash of paint. We started this particular hike just after midnight, the kind of cold spring night where the air smells sharp and the woods sound muffled. The trail I chose winds up a hill a few miles outside a small town in Oregon, near the foothills of the Cascades. It's not crowded, and the summit has a good view of the stars, which is why I go. I needed the quiet that night, away from everything. Work had been brutal for weeks. We reached the top after about 45 minutes of climbing through thick trees and scrambling over loose rocks. Dusty was restless, sniffing everything, occasionally sitting and staring off into the dark. I set down my pack and pulled out a thermos of coffee, leaning against a rock to look up. That's when I noticed something weird with the stars directly above the hilltop. I'm used to looking at the night sky, always have been. But those stars didn't look quite right. They didn't twinkle or blink the way stars normally do, and there was this subtle motion to them, like they were part of a slowly rotating pattern. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, maybe the cold or the fatigue. I blinked and stared harder. The stars seemed to shimmer together, like the whole patch of sky was a camouflaged surface rotating very slowly. Not fast enough to be immediately obvious, but if I focused for a few minutes, I could tell the shapes and patterns shifted. It was like watching a giant kaleidoscope turn almost imperceptibly. I shook my head, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Dusty growled low and looked up too, his ears twitching. That was strange. He usually ignores the stars. I turned on my flashlight to check my watch. About 1:15 a.m., then I noticed a faint humming sound like distant machinery, just below the wind noise through the trees. It was so soft I almost didn't catch it. I paused and listened. Dusty sat down beside me, alert. The humming didn't come from the town, which was miles away, and there were no roads or power lines nearby that would explain it. I figured it was some weird natural thing, maybe the wind interacting with the trees. But the sound was steady and low, not random. I looked back up at the stars. The shifting pattern was still there, and something about the geometry felt off. Like it wasn't random star clusters, but shapes arranged on purpose. Triangles, diamonds, lines connecting points. The shapes moved slowly, rearranging themselves. I took a step back from the rock and tried to look around. The forest below the hill was black and still, but just past the tree line, I caught what looked like a faint glow. Not bright like a flashlight, but like soft blue light pooling on the ground. I called out, but no answer. Dusty growled again, ears pinned back. Feeling uneasy, I packed up quickly. The shifting stars and that humming weren't normal. As we descended, the light vanished. The humming faded too, swallowed by the forest sounds. When we got back to the car about an hour later, I noticed the dashboard clock was almost 15 minutes behind what my watch had shown at the summit. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe I just lost track of time, but the weirdest part came the next day. I was talking to my friend Rachel on the phone, telling her about the hike and the strange star patterns. She paused, then said, "Wait, didn't you tell me last week you went hiking by that hill? On Friday night?" I was sure it was last night, Monday. I checked my phone's photo timestamps and my GPS trail log. All of them said Monday night. Rachel sounded confused. She insisted I had mentioned going out the previous Friday and said she remembered because she'd warned me about a storm coming in. I was sure I hadn't gone out Friday. No weather alerts had been in effect Monday, but a small thunderstorm had rolled through Friday night. I double-checked my work schedule and calendar. No hikes Friday. No idea how I'd gotten the nights mixed up. That was when I started questioning the whole thing. Maybe the shift in the stars was some kind of optical illusion after all. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the summit for a while and dreamed the whole pattern. Except Dusty seemed spooked for days afterward. He kept staring up at the sky at night, ears twitching. A few nights later, I went back to the same hilltop, this time just before dawn. The stars were back to normal, steady and twinkling. No humming, no shifting patterns, no strange lights. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I check the sky from my backyard, hoping to see that subtle rotation again, but it never comes. And I'm left wondering if that night was a glitch, a weird moment where the sky warped just enough to remind me how little I really understand what's out there.